Welcome to Weather Command in Florida, live on Fort Myers Beach. I'm Amy Freeze. Today is Thursday, June 1st. The official start of the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season is upon us, and right on cue, we've got a disturbance in the Gulf. The hurricane hunters are already scheduled to fly over 91L. That's how we're going to identify this disturbance. Right now, it has a 50% chance of development within the next 2 days. That means we could be getting our first named storm of the season. That would be Arlene, the top storm on the list. 8 a.m. advisory came in just over 55 minutes ago. This really is a system that we'll be watching. It needs more thunderstorm development. There's been very little movement with it, not a lot of organization, but it is something to watch. We initially thought this might be impactful for Florida, but right now it looks like the peninsula will get showers, but perhaps will not get anything more than that. We could use some rain on the West Coast. Let's go now for that rain impact that we could be seeing. In fact, we're watching some of these showers on the radar. Early on, we have had actually portions of Florida where we are really in a surplus of rain. We have some deficit on the West Coast, like where we would like to see that, but at the same time, we're actually looking at the changes that could come with this. Look at the banding that could bring some light shower activity to the West Coast of Florida. Places like Miami, though, have been getting the right hook and even the double jab at times. It has been a wet April and May. 81 degrees. We have Fox Weather's Brandy Campbell right there in Miami right now. Certainly, it has been a wet couple of weeks there, Brandy.
Oh, it really has, especially as a resident. It's been raining a lot. But look, the weather so far today is looking pretty good, Amy. But we know in the next or later on today, our Fox Weather app is showing some storms coming in. We're currently under a flood watch going into tomorrow afternoon. This is good for some parts of Florida. 14% of this state is still in drought conditions, but areas like Miami and Fort Lauderdale, we don't need any more rain. Actually, if you guys take a look at this video, you can see what we've been going through. Early April, a storm dropped over 2 feet of rain in Fort Lauderdale. Now they are 30 inches over their average rainfall for this year. Miami in surplus with 10 inches over average. So the ground is saturated, and the 2 to 6 inches of rain expected could cause an issue with flooding here, guys. So meanwhile, areas like Tampa, they are in drought and they could use the rain, but unfortunately, the bulk of this will not get to them. So for now, we're just starting to see some warnings from entities like Miami Fire Rescue, just warning people to expect flooding and to not drive into those situations where you'll get stuck and have to call on them. But also just in time, the city of Miami, their emergency operations center, they're holding a drill, a hurricane drill for their team to get prepared for this season. Coincidentally, this storm is coming upon us. They're also asking residents to also get ready. Back to you.
We will stay tuned to the forecast and to what happens in Miami. Brandy Campbell, thanks for your report. That Fort Lauderdale event that happened, that goes down in state's history as the wettest 24-hour period that we've ever seen in Florida. Now, we are back live in Fort Myers. Fox Weather's Robert Ray joins me now, Storm Zone veteran. You are the warrior back into the battle zone here. As you get to Fort Myers Beach, you recall being here for Hurricane Ian.
Indeed, and where we're sitting right now, 8 months ago and the weeks after, we couldn't be here. We couldn't be standing here. There'd be piles of debris 10, 15 feet high, Gulf of Mexico right behind us, Amy. And this really is the epicenter of Hurricane Ian's wrath on Fort Myers Beach here in Sanibel Island up to the northwest. Just tremendous progress being made, but so much to do still.
When we head into hurricane season, you are boots on the ground. Right now, we're getting new information coming in about the forecast the season ahead. Today's day one as we kick off the season. But we can look back, and Colorado State University has already given us some information about what this season could have. They actually went back to April to give us a little bit of insight as that early storm forecast came in from Phil Klotzbach and his team. And what they told us is that they were expecting a lower than average season. So less number of storms perhaps, but they cited El Nino as some of the uncertainty to this forecast. You look at the numbers here, and CSU came down with 13 named storms. That's below average. You also look at the number of hurricanes that was forecasted by NOAA. NOAA is another spot where they give the forecast. This came out just last week, and the information that was given there was actually near normal numbers coming in for the hurricane season. You know, this has been interesting for us to watch, and the look at El Nino and how these forecast entities, or forecast teams, I should say, are putting together their forecast, because we can actually have a lower than average number come out, lesser storms, but that doesn't discount the fact that one storm could be incredibly powerful, and that's where we could see the season really develop. Again, we look back to what's already happened, and today will be the day that Colorado State University updates that very important forecast. Now, I was lucky enough, Robert, to be able to go to the National Hurricane Center this week. And I say lucky because we got some valuable information. We were able to talk to the National Hurricane Center's new director. Yep. Michael Brennan. He's taken over the leadership there, and really some interesting things are happening. What he pointed out in the conversation that I had with him is, as we go into this season, letting down your guard just because you think the lower number of storms might impact us is certainly not what they want people to do. So when they see the forecast here, they do have some concerns. I want to share part of my conversation that I had with him this week. And this is going to be a season to remember, I think, because as we go into it, there is some uncertainty about what's ahead.
And regardless of what that seasonal forecast says, the threat is there every year for everybody who lives in a hurricane-prone area. We've seen impacts from Texas to Maine, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, many, many times in the last year, several years, going all the way back to 2016. But so many impactful hurricanes, Gulf Coast, East Coast. So people have to be ready, regardless of what the seasonal forecast says. And even a year where you're expecting 12 to 17 named storms, that's a lot of storms. There's a lot of potential for impacts, and it only takes one storm affecting your area to make it a really bad season for you.
El Nino is to credit for perhaps the quieter season ahead. When you look at an El Nino year, does that lower the confidence a little bit on a forecast that you put out, simply because there's that double-edged chance?
Well, there's competing factors. We have El Nino coming on, developing, we expect, during the hurricane season this year, but it's not really there yet. We don't know how strong it's going to be. We don't know how long it's going to take to develop.
And the water's already warm.
And the waters in the Atlantic are very, very warm. We're in the midst of this multi-decadal active period in the Atlantic. There are other favorable factors. The West African monsoon is more active than normal. We have weaker easterly trade winds, and all those factors in the Atlantic side would normally suggest a busy season. So we have El Nino coming on, which might sort of counteract that. So those forces are going to sort of battle it out during the season. So that's why there's more uncertainty than normal in the seasonal forecast this year. So we're expecting a near normal season, but it could be a little below normal. It could also be above normal, depending on how that plays out.
You've supervised 18 U.S. landfalls. I looked up your stats. If we were talking stats in sports, pretty impressive. 8 of those were major. Ian, of course, the 5th Category 5 to get rapid intensification. Of course, it made landfall as a Cat 4, but it had that rapid intensification. With these, El Nino seasons like this, do we expect more last-minute strengthening, that rapid intensification because of warmer water? Could that be an increase in the strength of a storm if it develops?
Well, typically with the El Nino, you'd expect maybe a little less of that because of the increased shear and the less favorable conditions in the Atlantic. But when you have those very pockets of warm water, and it doesn't take conditions to be favorable over a very big area or for a very long time for a storm to sort of find that environment where it can strengthen. They have great examples like Hurricane Andrew from 1992. Quiet season, it was the A storm in late August, but when it rapidly intensified, made landfall in South Florida as a Category 5 hurricane. So it only takes a small pocket of opportunity for a storm to sort of find the right spot to go on and strengthen. But we are making progress in forecasting rapid intensification. Our average intensity errors one day out when rapid intensification happens are basically half of what they were 4 or 5 years ago. So we're making progress, but getting the details right is really hard. When's the rapid intensification going to start? How long is it going to last? We know the environment generally that supports it, but the details are hard, and typically storms might strengthen a little more than we think, or they might not start strengthening until a little later. But the main message is that we can actually start to make some of those aggressive rapid intensification forecasts now that really weren't possible 5 or 10 years ago.
I'm curious, why do you think the increase in skill there is? Has it been because you know better and you can look for those things as human forecasters? Has there been some technology meet up?
It's all of it. Our scientific understanding of the environment that's favorable for that is better than it used to be, but we get more data from aircraft that fly into the storm. All those data from the hurricane hunters now actually go into the forecast models like HWRF, like the new HAVS model, and that's improved their ability to forecast the intensification at those sort of rapid rates, and that helps give our forecasters here at the Hurricane Center the confidence to make those more aggressive forecasts.
Michael Brennan, he is such a force to be reckoned with the National Hurricane Center. His leadership is going to make a big difference, I think. in sort of adding that technology factor. So well led last season as well by the deputy there, Jamie Rome, who led the National Hurricane season as they tried to find a new replacement. We know that as Ian made landfall, that rapid intensification that Brendan was talking about did happen. It wasn't until later that we got that classification of the Cat 5, but when it landfalled, it was known as a Cat 4. I'm sure for you, when you were standing there, it didn't make a lot of difference what those wind speeds were.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's all about impact at that point, and it's all about knowing whether it was a 5 or a 4. We're still at over 150 miles an hour, and we know that when you're dealing with a situation like that, you got to get out of Dodge.
You had 17 hours straight of Hurricane Ian coverage leading up to the storm, the force of the winds, the rain driving down, and of course the monster waves that came inland. That was terrifying.
It was nearly an entire day of live reporting during that, and we started, Amy, here on Fort Myers Beach in the morning, pre-dawn, and we knew that as it was coming in, we needed to get off. We needed to go over the bridge here and get out of this island, and that's what we did. We went 10, 12 miles into Fort Myers downtown and reported there, knowing that this storm surge was going to put a wallop on this beautiful 7-mile stretch.
A lot of people had to get out of the way because the force of the storm did the destruction. It damaged, pretty much wiped some of these barrier islands and did a lot of destruction to Fort Myers Beach.
Indeed, and that's really the issue that people are still going through right now, Amy, is the fact that there are people without homes, living in trailers, insurance issues, everything that you can possibly imagine is happening. And I spoke to many of those people this week. Let's have a listen and a watch. September 28th, 2022. Hurricane Ian came ashore in southwest Florida. Winds over 150 miles per hour. Storm surge rose as high as 15 feet on Fort Myers Beach. Over 150 people lost their lives, 66 of them in Florida alone. Ian is also the costliest hurricane in Florida history, causing over $110 billion in damage.
Well, you wondered if it was ever going to stop. The house I was staying at, my feet were at about 17 feet of elevation, and the water came about a foot from my feet. So we almost had to evacuate. We thought we were going to have to evacuate to the 3rd story. Obviously, we saw houses washing by us. We saw boats going by us. We saw, you name it, it floated by us. And, it was just heartbreaking knowing that some of our friends were staying in houses that weren't as strong as the one that we were in. And unfortunately, we lost some friends.
Many survivors like Catherine Butler are still reeling on Fort Myers Beach. Block after block, homes are crumbling or gone from their foundations. 97% of the structures here were destroyed or damaged. Today, some residents are living in trailers while they wait for insurance money. 8 months later.
The insurance, I've paid 3 insurances for 27 years and only one of the 3 has paid. The one that did pay, I sent to my mortgage company because they told me they would apply it towards my loan. But unfortunately, they're holding it hostage in an escrow account. And since I still have a mortgage balance, they've refused to apply that money towards my mortgage. So I have this hefty monthly mortgage payment on a house I no longer own.
Ranking as the 2nd largest insurance loss in world history, Ian is only 2nd behind Hurricane Katrina in 2005, according to new analysis. For Paul Edwards, whose family built a home on Fort Myers Beach in the 1950s, only to see it washed away by Ian, the future is uncertain.
I still have property here, but it's not really home anymore. That kind of thing. So what is the rebuilding process going on? What does the future look like? I don't know.
There is no telling how long the rebirth will take, but for those staying, the fight is real and raw.
We have good days and bad days, and fortunately now there are more good days, but I'll be honest with you, my cup is so full that just one extra little drop I overreact to.
And Amy, I got to tell you, it is brutal to listen to what these people are going through. I mean, can you imagine? You lose everything you have. You're really out of money. You're dealing with the bank. You're dealing with insurance, uncertainty. You put your nest egg into this beautiful paradise. And then what? It's a terrible situation.
My heart breaks for them, and it is quite a price to pay for living in paradise. All they wanted to do was really live in a beautiful spot, but you're up against the ocean, and it really is a fierce, hard lesson to learn about the fury of the storm. But at least they survived. That's the other part. You have the property loss. We're going to talk more about this as we go throughout Weather Command today here in Florida. But Hurricane Ian turned out to be the deadliest storm in Florida in more than 80 years. You know, tragically, we lost more than 150 lives. Coming up here on Fox Weather, we do have a special investigation into the evacuation of Lee County, Florida. Plus, Fox Weather Network has cameras all over the place. We are looking at Tampa, 75 degrees and overcast there, 76 temperatures, mid-70s in Naples. Clouds are going to come and go. You're breaking through, though, Naples. We can see your blue skies. Miami, you've got 85, a mix of sun and clouds early on. Fox Weather, we are live with Weather Command in Florida. Welcome back, everyone. Weather Command in Florida. We are live in Fort Myers Beach. The sun has come out. It really is a good-looking day. But just 8 months ago, Hurricane Ian brought the Atlantic onshore. Right where we are right now, everything was underwater. Surge is enemy number one for hurricane season. It's literally the water that's pushed inland by the wind and the waves. And we had a really rapid, powerful invasion of water here in Fort Myers Beach. We had a camera that was actually positioned outside of oceanside in Fort Myers, and in just minutes the ocean came in. This is some of the most underestimated parts of a storm system. Ultimately, we had a 15-foot storm wall here in Fort Myers Beach, but in a storm, you basically hide from the wind and you run from the water. But like any Category 4 hurricane, if you stayed behind, the reality was that Ian was too fast to outrun. Fox 4 in Fort Myers spent 7 months after the storm digging into the Hurricane Ian evacuation process. They reviewed forecasts from the National Hurricane Center, the local National Weather Service office. They compared all of those forecasts with the messaging from the Lee County evacuation plan and also the actual press conferences, the messaging to the public leading up to the storm. Right now, we welcome Fox 4 investigative reporter Nadine Yanez, and she is sharing with us her investigation and what it uncovered. And Nadine, what started this search for information? Why did you guys decide to investigate what happened with the evacuation?
Oh, you mentioned it. It was the press conferences leading up to it. You know, the Monday before Hurricane Ian hit, which was a Wednesday morning, the tone from the county manager was, if you're nervous, you could go. We were thinking that the evacuations would come then, but then it was Tuesday morning, the morning before the storm, that we heard, okay, now we're in great peril. There was such a shift there, and even reporters in the news conferences were wondering when that evacuation was coming and was questioning it. And then we decided to look back at the plan to see how it lined up with the timing of it. And not only that, I personally interviewed 2 people who were just rescued off Fort Myers Beach on the other side of the bridge. They said they had the hotel reservations, but they got a phone call Tuesday that it was canceled. They spent an hour and 45 minutes trying to find another hotel and just couldn't happen. It was too late.
Really tough situation. I know your investigation was a long piece that shows every angle of it. I know you're going to share a part of it with us today.
Yes, that's right. You know, I have to give credit to our team. It was an investigative team. As the evening anchor at Fox 4, they had me join in after speaking to so many survivors. And we had trouble finding the outrage from the survivors at first. But as that shock kind of wore off, they felt someone needed to share the responsibility. And that's what we're going to hear from right now.
Bad decision to stay.
September 28th, 8:12 a.m. Mitch Pacina began documenting his day as Hurricane Ian flirted with Southwest Florida's coast, already anxious.
Okay, surge is coming in. All right, let's hope for the best.
Mitch's last video posted at 12:23 p.m.
This ain't letting up yet. If it gets a little higher, may have to go on the roof.
1 hour later, his last post, reading, "Okay, we're terrified."
Do you feel like if that urgency was there,
more people would be alive?
Yes. I don't think Mitch and Mary would have stayed if they had thought it was going to get up to there. It was almost like
Wrong decision.
kind of just left it up to us.
It's okay to go now.
Should we have taken it more seriously? Of course, but they should have relayed it to us a lot sooner and more desperation. Like, hey guys, leave. During Irma, they had buses coming and getting people too. And there was none of that. This time, it was really like the day before. They're like, get out now. Get out now, this is serious. And we're like, we don't have a car.
In hindsight, could you have done it a day earlier? Of course. We did that up in Tampa.
You could just see how slow, a car is going at this time.
This evacuation's timing contradicting the county's own emergency plan. That cites a 2010 study saying Lee County needs more than 20 hours to safely evacuate Zone A, B, and C. And by the time the 32-hour mark was reached between when the county issued the first evacuation order,
Mandatory evacuation order,
to when Ian's eye made landfall, it was 3 p.m. Wednesday. Half of the hurricane was already on shore.
we desperately wish that there had been no fatalities. And we will, of course, tweak our messaging. Be Zone A. I'm comfortable with the decisions that were made and the timing.
Despite these decisions did not follow the county's own plan.
And it seems like it's a pretty simple chart. It says once we get the storm surge at 40%, 4 feet or higher, we call Zone A. By Sunday night at 11, we had more than 40%. So what's the point of having a plan if it's laid out in black and white, but then we don't adhere to it?
All of those studies that you see and charts that you see calling for evacuation times, that's a place to start. That's not the final decision point.
Okay. Wow, it's tough to watch as you go back. Did Lee County ever make any concessions that maybe they could have done things better? By the way, we did invite Lee County Commissioner's office to come out. They couldn't make it here in person today, but what was their response as you presented some of this?
You heard they say that they feel the messaging was appropriate. They felt the timing was appropriate. They did say they're making an after Ian action report. We're hoping that would come out soon so we can see a little bit more. And they did say they will definitely be tweaking their messaging ahead of this storm season. As you know, our community is vulnerable, and so we know moving forward that urgency will be there.
We bring in Robert Ray for this because he was here for the storm. Robert, you knew during the surge that you had to get out.
Yeah.
You didn't stay here at Fort Myers Beach. You went to the city.
Yeah, it was a calculated decision. We knew that Fort Myers Beach was going to take water, just how much. I don't think anyone anticipated upwards to 15 feet or more. But at about 8:45 a.m., we basically decided we were leaving the beach. We positioned ourselves not far from where we're sitting here right now, and we went over the bridge, drove into downtown Fort Myers, positioned ourselves in a parking garage so that we could save our vehicles and our lives, frankly, and reported there for the next, 15 hours plus. And guys, I do want to say something, and I'm not sure if you've heard this. I have heard from multiple people on this island talking that Irma was supposed to be Ian.
Great point.
And yet, see, a lot of people left during Irma back in 2017, and so maybe people thought that Ian was not going to cause the devastation it did.
And to that point, our survivors said in Irma they remember having buses down here, people knocking on doors, so they felt the urgency wasn't there. But you make a great point. It was hard to find the outrage because these survivors are getting slammed for staying here.
Wow.
But they do feel that if that urgency was there like it was for Irma, they might have left. And there is a segment of the population here that's the barefoot beach folks who don't have a car. Our survivors didn't have a car to get out like you did.
Yeah.
Also, how many elderly people just live here and couldn't get out? And I think that was what my passion was in getting involved and making sure we're telling that part of the story as well.
Incredible reporting,
Thank
by the
you.
way.
Thank you
Not
so much.
easy lifting there by any means.
No, thank you so much.
There's been a recent study that shows in Lee County, if there is a Category 5 storm coming for Lee County, the population currently needs 48 hours for evacuation. Very important to get everybody out safely, and to do that, we appreciate you coming in. Fox 4, Nadine Yanez, here with us at Fox Weather, Fort Myers Beach. Still to come, we talk about these studies. The Transportation Advisory Commission says that in the future, we have to look at population growth for these evacuation zones. For example, if we go to 2040, 20 years from now, we could need more than 3.5 days to evacuate. So these are the questions and these are the concerns as you start to plan for yourself. Personal safety, personal responsibility, a big part of what's ahead this hurricane season. We have much more on the other side of the break. Weather Command in Florida, live in Fort Myers. If you live in a coastal community, make sure you know your evacuation plan. We'll be right back. Weather Command in Florida, live in Fort Myers. We've got day one of the season right in front of us. For many who are recovering from last season, this is tough. Disaster fatigue, storm anxiety, they're an everyday part of life right now. Nevertheless, when we're weathering it together, that means we've got to face the storms that are coming our way. And there is a disturbance right now to watch in the Atlantic. The advisory that's come in this morning has us identifying 91L. This storm has got a 50% chance of development over the next 2 days. The good news here, I think, is that we don't expect a major threat for the peninsula, for Florida. South Florida, you know, they've been caught in the crosshairs more than their fair share. That's why we're here in Fort Myers. But you go further into Fort Lauderdale, where they've got a 10-inch surplus of rain. We get into Miami, where they have had storm after storm flooding out the streets there. Temperatures in the low 80s. Sun is shining now. Fox Weather's Brandy Campbell is live. We know the rain that could have threatened from this disturbance. Maybe we get a lowering of the threat, Brandy. Perhaps the West Coast gets a chance to get a little bit of rain. Nonetheless, it feels like it's been an aggressive start to the rain season.
That's right. But thankfully, at this point, the weather's looking pretty good in Miami. But we know later on today we're going to get some storms. We're also currently under a flood watch until tomorrow afternoon. Now, it's almost weird because we're kind of going through a deja vu with this first disturbance. If you want to take a look at this video, this is from last year. This same time, we had a disturbance that passed over Florida in the first few days of hurricane season. That dropped over 13 inches of rain in the Miami area, flooding several areas across the city. That disturbance eventually went to the Atlantic and became the first named storm, Tropical Storm Alex. So just a weird deja vu moment, same timing, same category, it's just a disturbance. But regardless of the name, category, the National Weather Service says all storms are different. So despite that, we're under a flood watch and we could get some impacts from this system. Back to you.
Steven's missing this.
Well, you know, Brandy, you make a great point here. Same time of season, our awareness, our antennas go up. We appreciate the report, the reminder, we are in it. Now, as we get into the storm season, we are looking at this disturbance, and if it is able to reach the 39-mile-an-hour mark there, could get a name. It would become Arlene, the first name on the list this season. It remains to be seen if that's going to happen. Again, there's a 50% chance over the next 48 hours. We'll be watching it. We have a look at this season's names. If you go down the list here, Brett, Cindy, Dawn, Emily, Franklin, Gerd, Harold, Adalia, Jose, Katia, Lee, Margot, I believe that's one's going to be Nigel. This is always a fun part of the meteorologist look ahead of the season before we get into the seriousness of the storms, is to see if we can actually pronounce all the names that are coming. There have been some real doozies over the years, that's for sure, but they come up with these to identify the storms. When you look at the forecast here, we know that CSU is coming out with their new storm list coming up. Early in the season, April, Phil Klotzbach and his team put 13 storms, named storms. That's slightly below the average. Okay. Now, when we look at this, one of the factors that not only CSU looks at, but also NOAA and the Fox Forecast Center is El Nino. And El Nino is expected to limit the number of storms. That's why you'll see some of these forecasts come out and they look like they could be lower or maybe right at the average, which is what NOAA has put out. But that's not necessarily a reason to let down our guard. This is an important point. As hurricane season has officially started off, we went to the National Hurricane Center. And we talked with them about some of these concerns, about some of these topics that cross our plate as we look at the forecast ahead. Now, one thing that they're going to be doing at the National Hurricane Center is using a 7-day extended tropical outlook. Now, they used to do up to 5 days in previous years. I spoke with the warning coordination meteorologist, Dan Brown, about this new tool that they're going to be using, and they say it is to give people more time to prepare for the storm. New 7-day outlooks. This is going to be something that we haven't done before. Why go out that far? Is there skill in that? The reason I ask is because a lot of people say, well, I checked the weather on Monday for the weekend, and maybe that was not in the outlook.
Yeah, we've been doing the 7-day outlooks in-house now for a few hurricane seasons, so there is skill in those forecasts. And because of that, we're going to go ahead and issue those to the public starting this hurricane season. It's going to provide people with a little more heads up on when systems could form. And I think it's going to help all of us in the weather community to be able to message these events. People see these events in the models 6, 7, 8, 10 days out, but now it'll give the Hurricane Center a chance to start putting those on our products so that we can all message it in a consistent fashion.
Do you worry that people won't check back?
I hope people for the outlook, really it's a product people should be looking at every day during the hurricane season. Again, it provides what could form, what's going on in the tropics, and it's a really good product to go and look at every morning. We issue those around 8 o'clock every morning during hurricane season, so come to our website, come to your local media, and find out what's going on.
At Fox Weather, we're definitely glued to those advisories and updates. You know, hurricane complacency is a big thing that, especially in Florida, they have to combat. When we come back to a storm like Hurricane Ian, before that storm hit, people had judged previous storms. You've even talked about your own family with Wilma and their ability to adjust to what the storm did. How do you overcome some of that message when people have a storm of reference?
Yeah, you know, that's one thing we really have to avoid. When you look at it, especially in the Southwest Florida coast, we had Charlie back in 2004, then we had Irma in 2017, and neither of those storms really produced a significant storm surge in the populated areas. Irma went south, Charlie was very small, so we have to know that each storm is different. And last year with Ian, it was a very large Category 4 hurricane, produced a devastating storm surge. So again, we got to take each storm seriously. Don't let that past experience dictate what you're going to do to prepare for the next one.
So important to remember that each storm is different. Just listening to his words, one storm may have not lived up to your expectations in the past. That doesn't mean that the next one won't. Important point being made there. Beyond forecasting tools, Fox Weather is using cameras. We call it ground truth. Our eyes inside the storm zone. That gives us also better gauges on forecasts. Some of the most incredible visuals that we get during tropical season coverage are captured by our teams in the field. Incredible, rare views of powerful storms. Let's talk about it. Fox Weather storm track and owner of HurricaneTrack.com, Mark Suddeth, joins us right now. Fox Weather's Robert Ray. You guys are really there. You're watching it happen. Mark, bring you in on this. I want to talk about, you know, the trickiness of Ian, but first let's talk about how you got into this. You've been to more than 2 decades now using technology to look at weather.
It started in 2005, that's exactly right. Ironically, the first name that year was Arlene. Does that mean anything this year? Remains to be seen. But yes, the technology has come a long way. We used to use Pelican cases. Those in the industry know exactly what that is, that are very large with a big battery. Now it's this size.
Oh, wow.
You know, I mean, it's just
like a
tiny.
lunchbox.
Right, it's like a lunchbox.
Oh, let me see that. I want to
with
actually
a
look at that a
camera
little bit.
in it.
That's kind of cool.
That we
I
can put
see
anywhere.
This, the eye of the camera right there.
So that's what we put out to, that's truth right there. That's what's happening on the ground. It does not have a family that's waiting for it back home, so it can go through anything, right?
I had heard a story that there was, Max Mayfield had been involved in saying, people shouldn't go out into the storm, you know, concern over people. This makes for a different story. And I mean, Robert, sometimes you're there in the storm, you certainly prepare, you think about what those conditions are going to be like. You always keep safety top of mind. I want to point that out.
Yeah, no, it's got to be. I mean, because at any second, as you know as well, storm surge specifically can wipe you out and take you out to sea, or a debris coming in from the water. Perhaps even a gate that gets taken off of a home can smash into you, and in a second you're gone.
Right.
Because you know about the storms and what they're going to behave like that as season's driving, is that how you know where to place the cameras?
Yes, and doing this, you know, the technology, we've done this for about 20 years, but 30 years of experience studying the patterns of hurricanes, understanding the impacts, working with the National Hurricane Center, going to the conferences, meeting with the local officials in the off season. You know, you mentioned Max Mayfield. He says the battle against hurricanes is won in the off season. So we learn a lot about where to put these cameras in a future event to try to capture those impacts and tell a story safely. And it spreads us out too. We can be in a lot of places at once to augment what the weather is being covered from Fox. That's great.
I mean, the visuals that you guys get from these remote cameras, and Amy, let me grab this if I can. I mean, it's very light. You got to tie it down. You got to make sure it's there. The camera right here, but these visuals, I think, that come from these tools highlight the dangers. I mean, especially here on Fort Myers Beach during Ian. I mean, we would have never known what was happening here. Emergency officials couldn't get here. Reporters couldn't get here. Everyone left, and those that stayed, unfortunately, many of them were trapped in their attics, or unfortunately, people did lose their lives. So incredible.
Mark, you're going to be with us here live in Fort Myers as we go throughout this morning. So I know you're with us here. I just want to thank you from Fox Weather, from our team, also from people who are watching, and just being the eyes in the storm. Such an important job. HurricaneTrack.com. Well, again, you're going to be with us as we go throughout the morning, but we'll continue to watch some of your footage as we go throughout. It really is fascinating to see the science behind what you're doing, and it is such a colorful opportunity for us to look at what's going on. Now, we've got the beach here, Fort Myers Beach. We've also got the city of the same name, but they're different, still the same, especially when you look at the location. We're going to bring in the city of Fort Myers Mayor, Kevin Anderson. He's going to join us here. Welcome to the beach, Mayor. Not a far trip for you. You're a little farther from the ocean, but you have a threat of your own with the river coming in. Fox Weather's Robert Ray here. He was actually right there in the city with you as the surge came in. Let's go back to that time period. What were your concerns as Ian came in?
Well, obviously the flooding. You know, while we're not right here on the Gulf and we didn't have the surge that the Gulf and the Barrier Islands and the beaches had, we did have the river, and we had about 4.5 feet come in from the river. So flooding was a real concern.
Yeah, big time. And Mayor, by the way, good to meet you, Robert Ray. Thanks for being with us. I will say, I mean, my team, my photographer and I retreated from here at about 8:45 a.m. on September 28th, knowing what was about to occur. When we got to your city of Fort Myers, 10 plus miles away, we found a parking garage, and we watched the deterioration as Ian came in. And then, as you stated, in the downtown area where many of those restaurants are, the water from the river began to come in, and the boats, the vessels unraveling. It was quite dangerous and very unnerving at that point. Where were you during that?
I was in a second-story condo at First and Henry in the heart of downtown, 3 blocks from the river. I got to watch the water come in, got up to about the top of a FedEx collection box. Knowing what downtown was 30, 40 years ago and watching it flood, really was concerning. Would we lose downtown? And we couldn't afford to go backwards.
I was going to ask you about the river, Caloosahatchee River?
Caloosahatchee.
Okay. Does it have a nickname, by the way? Just for future? Caloosahatchee. Okay, that's the nickname.
Not the hooch, like in Georgia.
Okay, I was just checking. I was just checking for the shortcut. As you looked at those threats, what were some of the takeaways, that you learned? Because it's not as bad as the beach, but still was a threat. You had homes and businesses that were lost.
So there's 3 things I like to stress to people. 1, prepare and plan so you don't have to panic. All right? Understand that the most predictable thing about a hurricane is that it is unpredictable. So if we're in the cone, if we're being threatened, react like we're going to take a major hit. And then the other thing is know that while you can hide from the wind, you've got to run from the water.
Yeah, big time. And not to mention over 7,200 vessels, yachts and boats up and down Southwest Florida, destroyed and piled on each other. And I'll never forget the morning after Ian showing up right near downtown and looking at those vessels on top of each other, and the sounds of the alarms and the smell of fuel. What an amazing pickup since. I don't know how you guys got all those out of there.
While this is the worst storm to ever hit our area, it's been the best recovery. And that comes from government plans. We weren't caught off guard. You can't stop the water from coming in. All you can do is prepare and then be able to react and start the recovery. And we've had a really great recovery.
Terrific leadership. We appreciate you taking some time. City of Fort Myers Mayor Kevin Anderson, thanks for being with us here. We want to do a quick check also of what's happening right now, because we've been watching in the Gulf a disturbance. It's been identified by the National Hurricane Center as 91L. And right now, this disturbance has about a 50% chance over the next 2 days of organizing, maybe becoming our first named storm of the season. And as we go into June 1st, a lot of people's heightened awareness of this particular storm is a reminder of what they've come through already. We continue here, Weather Command live in Florida, right on Fort Myers Beach, eyes to the sky. We look at Venice Beach. We're all over Florida today. It is wet, it is warm, highs in the 90s for you, some gusty winds and drenching rain for the afternoon. Sounds like a typical Florida day. Again, we are heating up the tropics. We've got our eyes on this storm. We will be right back here with much more Weather Command in Florida. What an incredible shot of the 3D thunderstorm activity happening right now in the Gulf with the Fox Forecast Center.
I'm Brian Norcross with a Hurricane HQ Minute on why Southwest Florida and the Fort Myers area are so especially vulnerable to storm surge. In fact, the entire Gulf Coast is extremely prone to storm surge because of what's just under the water, just offshore. We all saw what happened to the islands just offshore of Fort Myers when Hurricane Ian made landfall. The strong winds pushed the water up to 15 feet above the normal high tide over Fort Myers Beach. Everywhere along the hurricane coast is susceptible to storm surge, but Southwest Florida and the Gulf Coast are especially vulnerable. The view from Google Earth tells the story why. Offshore of the west coast of Florida is a large area of relatively shallow water called the West Florida Shelf. The water there is about 300 feet deep, but at the edge of the shelf, suddenly the Gulf is nearly 10,000 feet deep. So when a hurricane pushes water up over the shelf, it has nowhere to spread except over the land. The bigger and shallower the shelf, the higher the surge. So it's that big shelf around the Gulf Coast that makes it more vulnerable than just about the entire east coast of the U.S. Stay with Hurricane HQ this hurricane season. Be prepared. Download the Fox Weather app now.
We are only a couple hundred yards from the Gulf right now. Welcome back, everyone. Weather Command in Florida. We are live in Fort Myers. As I mentioned, the Gulf, we are also watching a storm right now, a disturbance, 91L, that is in the Gulf. This storm now has an elevated risk of becoming a named storm, a 50% chance over the next 2 days. So 91L, we've got our eye on you. Kind of a front row seat here in Fort Myers, if you will. Possible development of this storm. It's 35-mile-an-hour winds. We need 39 to get it a name. It's moving northwest at 6 miles an hour. One of the sort of optimistic developments here today is we don't expect a big impact for the peninsula. However, we'll be watching this one very carefully because as it meanders in the Gulf, these are very warm waters. In fact, some of the Gulf waters right now are warmer. Not only warmer than average, but they're also near records in some places, in some pockets. So this is what we've been watching. Look at those water temperatures right now, 75 to 83 degrees. We are also in the Gulf. You've got the Gulf Stream on the other side, exceptionally warm as well. We have a developing El Nino. That is warm waters of the Pacific, but it also increases the warmth that we get, eventually increasing that temperature for the Gulf and the Atlantic as well. The one thing El Nino could do to help out is the shear development in the Atlantic. That lessens the storm threat. It diminishes the number of storms typically in a year. But because we have a double-edged situation, Robert, this is something that we can't necessarily let go of. We're going to get into this. We've had already $7 billion disasters coast to coast. Hurricane season has not even really started. Here we are, day one. When Hurricane Ian hit, it was the most destructive storm of the 2022 season. It cost $109 billion in damage. You talk about numbers here. Let's talk, because FEMA has given more than $5 billion in federal grants, disaster loans, flood insurance payments to the state of Florida and the survivors who are trying to jumpstart the recovery here. FEMA Director Deanne Criswell doubled down on these storms and disasters. She says putting money into building sustainability to reduce the cost of disasters is one of the answers.
A community like Fort Myers, so devastated by Hurricane Ian, received a lot of FEMA money. When you start to see a community build back like that and some of the dollars at work, what's the biggest hope that can come out of a situation like that?
To make sure that we're building it back in a way that's going to make it more resistant to these storms in the future.
Helicopter the first time here. I was flying here.
We've got more of her interview coming up. in about an hour here on Weather Command. We're going to start to have conversations with some people, including the National Hurricane Center's Jamie Rome. And one of the things we revisit with him is the priceless loss of life. So talking about loss of structure and property damage is one thing, but the tragedy here is that we lost people. This was the deadliest storm in Florida in more than 80 years. Coming up, we'll have more with Jamie Rome. 40 of those 150 deaths, by the way, happened with storm surge, and he is the head of the National Hurricanes Storm Surge Specialist Team. And we talked about that topic, of course, surge. But the other thing we talked about with him was the possibility of a storm happening more than once, a storm striking the same area repeated times. And here's something that Jamie shared with us, too, during the interview.
Do you think that people just miscalculate the power of water? Why do they decide not to leave even though they know storm surge is coming?
It's actually a complicated question, because as much as we as meteorologists want to place the onus on the forecast or the forecast messaging, why people choose not to go is often not anything to do with the forecast. It's various barriers. Whether it be socioeconomic barriers, they might not even have the money to go. It might be so scary for them, it's crippling. They might not even have the means to go, meaning they might be elderly or unable to physically go. And so it's going to take a long time to unpack why some people in Ian chose not to stay.
Great insight there from Jamie Rome. We'll have more from him coming up here on the program. Fox Weather's Robert Ray has been to some of those places where surge has taken over. Robert, I'm going to bring you in because two places come to mind. Part of my conversation with Jamie continued to say, could a storm happen again? Right. One place twice, right? I know you've been you've been back to Maria zone through Fiona, Puerto Rico. That's one that comes to mind, but there is that question. Does it happen in the same place twice? You've seen it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we look at Puerto Rico, indeed, Fiona and Maria. And then how about this? Lake Charles, Louisiana, right. And that happened in 2020 where we had Hurricane Laura and Zeta just absolutely decimating parts of Lake Charles and what they went through. And we also know, gosh, New Orleans, how many times have they been hit?
Yeah, and part of it is the geography, right? Part of it is the geography, the susceptibility, the vulnerability of their proximity when these storms come in and how the ocean lines up with the land. But when you talk about the vulnerability of places that have already been hit, the thing that just jaw dropped me, was when we look at Ian last season, when we look at Nicole last season, and then we look at the climatology. These are storms that lined up. Ian lined up, of course, historically with Charlie. Nicole lined up historically with Jean. When you look at these two things, I think this is a big story. This is a big message for people out there.
Rapid intensification. And also we have the sea surface temperatures that are much higher, and that is a huge factor, Amy.
Yeah, I want to talk more about these tracks and how they went in. The coincidences of hurricanes going into the same places. We have lots of damage footage, lots of looks at what the storms could do. But does it happen in the same place? Take a look right here at some of the science, some of the meteorology from the weather presentation team about how these storms happen. Category 5, Maria did a lot of damage, but then when Fiona came in, it didn't do as much. These storms don't always behave the same. And I first came ashore in September 22 in Cayo Costa. But if you look at what Charlie did, the comparison of location was very similar, but what the storms did were very, very different. That's the same scenario that we have with Nicole versus Jean. So these are all comparisons that I think are important stories. So these storms happen 18 years apart, but the tracks were very, very similar. Meteorologists looking at this learned a valuable lesson, and I hope that messaging transfers over to some of the coastal communities. All right, when you go through the impacts of a hurricane, the brave first responders rush to the worst of this. They are the ones who are there for us all the time. Now, we go back to them for some of the lessons, some of the takeaways and messaging going into a new hurricane season. Thank you for being with us, Lee County Sheriff's Department. We have Carmine Marcino here with us. Take us back to the storm.
Yeah, wow, it's an amazing day here, and thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's an honor. As I come down Fort Myers Beach, I can't believe what we've done and how quickly we recovered. I remember the day in the hurricane right after, coming in a helicopter, watching buildings burn. There was literally just people waving flags in different levels of housing, needing assistance. and landing, and just, some people say a pitch is worth 1,000 words. I'll tell you, some pitchers leave you with a loss of words.
Wow.
Yeah, Sheriff, I gotta say, what you guys did in the aftermath was remarkable and painful and mentally and physically grueling. I know what you guys went through to a point, but I have to ask you, at what point in the aftermath were you able to go, oh my God, I can take a breath, everything is okay, and we can start to think about how to move forward?
You know, you plan, right? You plan for everything. You plan for the worst case scenario moving forward. You never know what Mother Nature's going to do. The path, we've seen the tracks, they change, some hit the same tracks. But you plan for everything, and then when it hits you, and we got hit harder than ever, you're devastated. And the first thing you're worried about is people's lives and property. I'll tell you, it was over 2 to 3 months before you can even take a breath.
Right.
Before you take a breath, you're not even wanting to sleep an hour or two a night because you don't want to miss anything.
Yeah.
I hear the sentiment and compassion in your voice and the care that goes in with first responders doing their jobs. But there does come a point when the storm becomes too dangerous, even for first responders. What advice would you give people? Because they were calling for help, they were expecting people to respond, but there is that fine line where at some point, first responders can't answer the call.
So Lee County's 1,260 square miles, and we deploy assets well before the storm even hits us, all over our county, so that we're ready to go at 45 miles an hour sustained winds. We come off the roadways. That's the big thing for people to really listen to. You know, when we can't get to you, if you have to shelter in place at some point in time and it's 45 miles an hour sustained winds, there is no first responders, EMS, fire, sheriff's office. You are on your own. So we want people to be in the places they need to be before that point, because it's devastating when you can't get back out to help people that are in need, and you know they are. We had over 6,000 calls for service holding the second we were able to deploy, and which was immediately after that storm.
6,000. Wow. That's incredible, because that's the power of the storm speaking, but it's also the power of people not completely understanding what the storm might do.
And the vast majority, I'd say over half of those, were welfare checks. People couldn't use, they couldn't call their loved one. They wanted to know if they were okay after the storm. And it's very difficult to identify properties that don't exist anymore.
Wow.
We don't know if people were in the state, out of the state, did they stay, did they leave? So it's a process. It was just 3 days, give or take, that we were able to complete and had no calls for service holding.
Thank you for being here. Lee County Sheriff's Office, Carmine Marcino, we appreciate you so much. And Robert, I know you've been there with first responders. We'll continue this conversation. We have a couple others who served during the storm. Some of these are so memorable that not only do they stay stuck in our minds, but also they're retired. We don't talk about some of those storms in the form of happening again because they go down in the books. 96 storms have been retired over the years, Ian, Fiona from last season. And to make sure that Ian wasn't forgotten, here in Fort Myers, an interesting development. There was a 70-year-old retired high school music teacher who wanted this to be remembered, and he wrote a folk song about it. I want to share some of that with you as we go to break. We'll be right back here.
Rivers at war, there's strange things swimming outside my front door. The creeks, they are flooding. I can't stop the rain, can't find my...
It's the first day of hurricane season, just 8 months since Hurricane Ian. Fox Weather revisits the storm's path.
This storm just continues to wreak havoc here.
We take a look at where the rebuild stands and how Florida moves forward in the storm season ahead. Ian made landfall in Cayo Costa as a monster Category 4 storm with winds of 155 miles per hour on September 28th. The direct hit wiped away homes and businesses along the southwest Florida coastline. The devastating impacts continued hundreds of miles inland to the central and northern part of the state, becoming the deadliest storm to strike Florida in more than 80 years. Hurricane Ian proved it only takes one storm. Fox Weather's Robert Ray takes us from landfall to storm recovery. While storms come and go, Fox Weather Hurricane HQ kicks off a new storm season and a renewed commitment to weather it together. Welcome to Weather Command in Florida. We are live on Fort Myers Beach. I'm Amy Freeze. June 1st is the calendar start to the hurricane season. Florida was the worst place hit last season, with Ian and Nicole making large impacts, but sometimes there are storms in the tropical season that never get a name, but they can leave a mark. They bring enormous amounts of rain or wind. that could happen this week. We're watching new information about a disturbance that's in the Atlantic. Here's what we know. The Fox Forecast Center is following this. The official start of the 2023 Atlantic season has 91L in our focus. The hurricane hunters are already scheduled to fly into this disturbance that's out in the Gulf. It's got a 50% chance of development within the next 2 days. That means we could be getting the first name storm in the coming days. The number one name on the list is Arlene, so we'll watch for that. As the advisory comes in, you get the latest information right here on the Fox Weather Hurricane HQ. Now, as rain develops, one of the question marks, as this is in the Gulf, is Florida in the risk zone? The peninsula there looks like it has a lower impact threat. But we've had drought on the west coast of Florida. It wouldn't be a bad thing for Tampa to get some moisture moving in, which is a good part of the hurricane season. We can get some of that moisture and it doesn't do damage. We go to Miami, where we've got a 10-inch surplus. They don't need any more, way above average for rainfall there. South Florida has been in the crosshairs more than once in some of these storms that have moved through already in the early rainy season. Temperatures in the 80s now. Let's go to Fox Weather's Brandy Campbell. Brandy, a lot of people at the start of hurricane season, they're thinking about preparation, but they've also got their eyes on the Gulf.
That's right. And look, some parts of the state need this rain and others don't, like you said it, Amy. But right now, the weather in Miami's pretty good, a little bit hot for my likings. But we are currently under a flood watch, according to the National Weather Service. And like I said, some parts of the state need this. 14% of Florida is still in drought, but places like Miami and Fort Lauderdale, well, we've had our fair share of rain so far this year. If you want to take a look at this video, it's showing flooding from early April from a storm that passed over this area that caused or dropped over 2 feet of rain in the Fort Lauderdale area. Now they are 30 inches over their average rainfall for this year. Miami has a surplus of 10 inches. Now the ground is saturated, and now with up to 6 inches of rain expected in some places, that could cause an issue with flooding here this weekend. Meanwhile, areas like Tampa, they're still in drought and they could use the rain, but unfortunately they won't get the bulk of it from this disturbance. So for now, we're starting to see some warnings to the public from entities like Miami's or the City of Miami Fire Rescue, just warning people of flooded roads. That could be a possibility, and not to drive into them. But also the City of Miami doing a hurricane drill for their EOC, or Emergency Operations Center, today to get ready for this season, and hoping residents will do the same. Back to you.
It's good to hear they're doing some drills, Brandy, but I feel like they've been in constant operation. You mentioned Miami getting so much rain, but also Fort Lauderdale. That storm, April 12th, goes down in the history books as Florida's biggest rainstorm in 24 hours time. They clocked over 25 inches in their gauges there. Just incredible. Fox Weather's Brandy Campbell live in Miami. Now we talk about the storm zone. We're here in Fort Myers. Let me bring in the warrior. Fox Weather's Robert Ray. He's gone to the battle zone, and it really is a setup where you have to strategically, Robert, think about what this storm is going to be like. As you come back here to Fort Myers, to bring back some of those moments where you're making the decisions in the storm?
It does, and as we sit here right now, and it's gorgeous, Gulf of Mexico right over our shoulder, the white sand beaches. And I think about the night before Hurricane Ian came in, and just looking around and thinking, a lot of this is not going to be here the next day. Now, the impact was catastrophic, and I didn't realize how deep the impact would be and how far inland the surge would go. But that is the thing. Yes, every move we made leading up, during, and after was calculated. We knew it was a risk, but everything had to be thought out, and we knew we had to get off this island to the mainland. And by the way, not just a mile in, but multiple miles in.
Almost 20 miles to get over to the river.
Indeed. And that is the case that we saved our lives, thankfully.
You were on the air for 17 hours covering Hurricane Ian. As we look at the new forecast that's ahead, we've gotten some indications already, because we had Colorado State University, of course, put out their mid-April forecast that came in with Phil Klotzbach and his team. He's going to be updating that today. We are going to get new information coming up at the 11 o'clock hour, so stick around for that. But they put out a below average forecast the first go around. They really cited El Nino as the reason for this. Now, what they mean by that is that El Nino is going to diminish or make it less likely for us to get storms. Now, how that impacted NOAA's forecast also is important to know, because NOAA put out a near average forecast. So you look at what they're doing here, it'll be interesting to see what CSU does because El Nino has actually strengthened and the likelihood of a strong El Nino is coming together. So we're watching that. Now, when you talk about NOAA and the National Hurricane Center, we go to the world headquarters in Miami, and we've talked to a lot of folks there this week about different aspects. But enemy number one in a tropical season, as you know, Robert, is the storm surge. Hurricane Ian sent a 15-foot tall wall of water coming inland. It was insane. It was an incredible, devastating impact when a storm comes in bringing that much water. You look at what it did to the beach side, but you've also got what happened. This is the surge coming in. This is the surge coming in. So where we are right now is where that surge came in. You can see how fast and rapidly and deep that went down. It really is a scary contemplation that some people might have been there. So I spoke with Hurricane Center's storm specialist, their surge specialist, Jamie Rome, about this deadly part of hurricane season. You included a dire warning in one of the forecast discussions before Ian. One of the last lines of it said to the public, "You're not a hurricane expert. If emergency managers order you to leave, then you need to go without question, without delay." As you look back, you included that messaging, but we still had a lot of deaths from storm surge. It's a tough part of any hurricane story to look at that. Do you think that people just miscalculate the power of water? Why did they decide not to leave even though they know storm surge is coming?
It's actually a complicated question because as much as we as meteorologists want to place the onus on the forecast or the forecast messaging, why people choose not to go is often not anything to do with the forecast. It's various barriers. Whether it be socioeconomic barriers, they might not even have the money to go. It might be so scary for them, it's crippling. They might not even have the means to go, meaning they might be elderly or unable to physically go. And so it's going to take a long time to unpack why some people in Ian chose not to stay. But I think reading that back, and I hadn't heard it read back since Ian. It feels like our messaging was pretty clear.
I want to go back to last season with Ian. We also had Nicole, but these are two storms that also had a climatological reference. Ian with Charlie and Nicole with Jean. When you look back at that, I mean, it really was jaw-dropping, but it's a pretty clear message that a major storm can happen in the same place more than once.
Oh yeah, and people have all these misconceptions about hurricanes, and if we could just debunk those misconceptions, it would go a long ways to helping society be better prepared. And there is this perception out there that if you've been hit or threatened by a major hurricane, then you get a pass for 10 years. And sometimes you don't even get a pass for 10 days, much less 10 years. So we really got to help people understand that hurricanes can come in waves, unfortunately, and they can come to the same location.
Great point there. Finally, as we look at the new season here, rapid intensification is always a challenge for forecasting. It's kind of the missing link to getting everything perfect, because I think we have a good deal of certainty a lot of times on the forecast path, right. But that rapid intensification question mark can really impact how people respond. Has there been new technology or anything new you'll be using this year to help with that?
Oh, absolutely. But first, let me speak to this is a misconception. We talked about if we can debunk these misconceptions, we go a long way. A lot of people assume that we're going to watch these things roll off Africa as tropical waves and see this hurricane lumber across the Atlantic with 10, 11, 12 days notice. That's just not how it works. Some of these hurricanes develop rapidly right on the doorstep, leaving communities with maybe 1 or 2 days to prepare. So we got to get away from this notion that you're going to get 10, 11, 12 days notice, which means people have to prepare now before a hurricane actually forms. Now, to your point, do we have new technology? Yes, absolutely. We're going to have the hurricane forecasters behind us are going to have the most advanced and sophisticated tools I've ever seen in my career here. Many of them explicitly aimed at predicting rapid intensification. We're deploying a brand new high-resolution modeling system that's specific for hurricanes. Its ultimate goal is to do a better job with rapid intensification. We'll still have the existing technology running side by side, so the hurricane forecasters will again have, it's shocking how much information and data they will have for this hurricane season.
impressive just to listen to Jamie Rome, a brilliant forecaster, great communicator. He talks about all the tools they're going to have at their fingertips. And one of the new tools is the rapid intensification technology. They can look and see and try to get a better handle, because as forecasters, the path of the storm is very well known. It's that rapid intensification that can get tricky. And that's when the storm gets stronger right before it gets to land. And so you don't want people to get caught off guard by that. So that's what we're talking about. But the surge specialist there that he is something that is a focus, because it is so deadly, and that's why people have to get out of the way.
Have to. And take this in, viewers and anyone else watching this, and Amy, you too. Where we're sitting, 7 miles is the size of long as Fort Myers Beach. The amount of debris in the aftermath filled 2 Empire State Buildings in New York City. If you think about that, piles of debris. And we're still fighting the debris here on this island. They're doing their best. There is progress, and that is great. But think about all of the people, the businesses, the restaurants, the hotels. This is a tourism industry here, and they're all still reeling.
And they haven't even gotten all the debris off the streets. There still is some debris. Are businesses coming back?
Some of them are. As a matter of fact, where we're at right now, Amy, as we know, the Beach Bar, a famous spot here, that there was a structure. Well, now there is simply tents and a trailer where they're trying to deliver, fun times for people and tourists that come in. But I did spend some time the past couple days moving up and down this beach and taking a look at exactly how that recovery is going. Sunset on Southwest Florida, as magical as any coastal region in the world. Until hell breaks loose via a tropical system. Hurricane Ian, just 8 months ago, deadly, costly, and catastrophic to the economy.
Well, we had about a 16-foot storm surge here. As you look around, you'll see all the buildings that were on the water are gone. This was all over here to my left, was all filled with restaurants, Dairy Queen, a couple restaurants and bars, a couple shops behind me.
The night before Ian, this was that exact location on Fort Myers Beach, Times Square. The next day, surge and winds decimated the island.
One of our friends that we lost in the storm, one of the last things I saw on his Facebook page was all capital letters saying, "I'm really scared now." And they ended up finding him quite a few days after the storm. His house had shifted off the pilings and he washed away.
Today, much of the debris has been removed, but piles still remain. Work is nonstop, yet there are still huge issues on the 7-mile island of Fort Myers Beach, known for its white sand and tourism.
This perfect square outline was the walk-in cooler, which our walk-in cooler was found on the dock for the Key West Express across the bay. Our whole walk, kegs, tap handles, everything across the bay. Well, it's unfortunate, but it's almost a clean slate that I think the future is only bright and nothing but up from here.
When you start driving up and down Fort Myers Beach, you see devastation on literally every side of the road, but you do see progress. And one of those places is the Pink Shell Resort, which is actually where myself and crew stayed the night before Hurricane Ian slammed into Fort Myers Beach.
Well, I think the most challenging thing is really to understand the scope of the work and try to put a game plan around it all. It's probably took a few months to really assess the scope of all the damage.
Publix grocery store recently opened. The Margaritaville Hotel is trying to open this summer on Fort Myers Beach, and neighboring Sanibel Island is slowly but surely fighting their way back. The biggest obstacles ahead in the region are insurance, building permits and codes, and then the almighty dollar.
We're seeing some businesses that probably are not going to reopen, but we're seeing other ones that are showing interest in coming to the island, which is encouraging. So I just keep telling everybody that keep moving forward, and unfortunately, like I said, we're going to lose some people, but we're going to gain some people back.
So much loss here, Robert, but the resiliency of these people, the fight that's still left in them.
Yeah, they're throwing haymakers at life, trying to get it back right now. And Amy, I have to say, you know, that beach, the Pink Shell Beach Resort that was in that story, their pool just opened up this week.
Can they have people stay?
They've got people staying. They actually had over 30 rooms booked, and they're trying to get the word out that yes, indeed, there's still disaster amid this island, but we're back in a sense. You can go on these beaches.
I saw the Publix is open.
Publix is open a block away. Incredible for the island. And again, where we're sitting, the Beach Bar, a famous spot here in Fort Myers Beach that is doing their best to invite not only locals but tourism back here. Because guess what? How do they all survive? Money.
Yes.
It's got to happen.
Tourism, a huge part of any coastal community and beach location. We have some more business owners that are coming on here with Fox Weather in Florida, live in Fort Myers to tell their stories. Also still ahead, Hurricane Ian was the deadliest storm in Florida in more than 80 years. It's pretty jaw-dropping to think about in itself. Tragically, we lost more than 150 people during the storm. Coming up on Fox Weather, we have a special investigation we're sharing with you into the evacuation of Lee County, Florida. You won't want to miss that. Plus, the Fox Weather Camera Network has its eyes on Florida. We're looking at Tampa. Temperatures pushing towards 80. We've seen some breaks in the clouds. It's looking good here. Naples, hello to you. Got a beautiful shot there at the beach in Miami. We could see storms later, but it's not a bad time right now to put your toes in the sand. We'll be back. Back to Weather Command. Today is the start of the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season. We start with this live look at Siesta Key, Florida. Statewide, this coastal portion of our country is vulnerable. We are here at the start of hurricane season to help you get ready. Right here, our location, Fort Myers, was ground zero for last year's most devastating storm, Ian. It really was a hard storm for these communities. It wasn't just Fort Myers, though, that was wrecked by the storm. Ian's impacts actually reached far and wide across the state. In fact, if you look at the Sunshine State, Southwest Florida's barrier islands got a beating during the storm. Places like Sanibel Island. You go back and there are aerial pictures where it goes over and you can barely recognize portions of those barrier islands. The Sanibel Causeway was destroyed during hurricane season. The bridge that connects Fort Myers to Sanibel, wiped out. 6,000 people who live on the island basically cut off from the mainland of Florida for weeks. And a temporary bridge was built within a month of the storm, and that was great news. But that was the work of everybody coming together. It was a hard feat for them to do. It was similar site of destruction and rebuilding for Sanibel's neighbor Pine Island. They also were hurt in a devastating way. Basically, in this portion of the barrier island here, you basically had tireless work of the state in order to get this accessibility here. Less than a week, they were able to go in after a Category 4 hurricane ravaged the area and have improvements. Now, you go to the other part of the state, which is the east coast of Florida, and we still had a lot of flooding and problems from Hurricane Ian. Orlando saw historic flooding. A lot of rescues happened inland. A lot of people don't realize the lakes overflowed. City leaders say a lot of the city's areas got upwards of 14 inches of rain. It caused really some big problems. Kissimmee is one of the spots where the water rose high and fast. That's just south of Florida. First responders had to use tractors and airboats to rescue people from the rising waters. I mean, 20 rescues in eastern Florida, life-saving efforts during this storm. We know what the power of the storm did because we were able to get visuals on it. Hurricane Ian brought some of these areas to their knees. Look at this time lapse that we've got here. We go back into the storm and we're able to get this visual because of Fox Storm Tracker Mark Sudduth. HurricaneTrack.com. About 2 decades under your belt, we bring you here with us, Fox Weather's Robert Ray on board. You guys are teammates in a way out there in the storm zone. You've got the eyes where you place these cameras, but you're tracking, you're getting in position just like Robert is. Sometimes Robert's looking and seeing, hey, what vantage point do we have here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a process. And you talk about that bridge going out to Sanibel. I remember we went out there, my partner Matt and I, to go set up the camera at Captiva and to see what happened to it later. You know, we know these things are probably going to happen when we're in these areas. I was thinking back to Katrina in 2005. We're riding along Highway 90 in Gulfport, and I was telling one of my partners then, you know what this is going to be like tomorrow? I mean, these are historic events that last far longer once they're over than the hurricane itself.
Well, you'd mentioned, though, that it was hard to get cameras in position when Hurricane Ian was approaching because there was this huge area that could be impacted. How do you choose?
That was very difficult. You know, we started in Key West all the way up towards maybe Tampa Bay. We had people in Tampa that were willing to help out. We were actually ready to put cameras inside of homes that people were going to allow us. They were going to evacuate. And then it just kind of all narrows down to, well, it looks like we're going to focus on Collier and Lee counties. But even that, as Robert knows, where do you go? Where are you going to do what you're going to need to do and to stay safe at the same time?
And to your point, Mark and Amy, the tricky forecast of Hurricane Ian. You know, I mean, 4 landfalls, by the way, which is tremendous. And on top of that, where do you set up? Would you set up Tampa Bay, Clearwater, St. Pete? Do you come down here and do it? And I got to say, I mean, also to your point, Amy, about how we are almost teammates out there. A lot of what I do is watch where their movements are, because you've been doing this a long time. I have too, but I got to say, it's all about the team and knowing exactly where we're all going to be.
Yeah, that coordination is really important, and that behind the scenes part is incredible. There should be a documentary about it someday, I think, but story for another day. But yes, it's an adventure because you're trying to figure out how to outmaneuver the storm to capture something that's very important for historical purposes, for science purposes. I was just talking to the next guest who's coming on, the fire chief, about how this can be used to educate people in the future.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. I know you're going to stick around with us the entire time. Weather Command is live here in Florida on Fort Myers Beach, so more to come with our teammate here, Mark Sudduth. As we look at some of the stories here in Fort Myers, it's important for us to realize that there are first responders who made their way in this community helping out, but they also had to survive the storm as well. We bring in right now Fire Chief of Fort Myers. Great to see you, Tracy McMillian. I mean, what a career you've had here, but take us back. We're 8 months since the storm. In your career, in the time that you've served this community, what was it like helping during Ian?
Completely different type of experience. You know, I've been doing this for 27 years and seen many storms come through, and never to this impact. Even went up to Hurricane Michael after and actually spent 10 days on the ground there. But that was after the fact. So to be able to actually have this type of situation when you're watching this major storm coming to your community, to your backyard, and then actually having an experience and go through it and then being able to respond and try to actually work with our staff and so many other partners, it definitely was a different experience. I appreciate it. Not looking for other experiences like that, but we're prepared for it and we're actually better for it after.
You know, Mark, you're going to get in on this, Robert, but Robert, you've seen what I'm about to ask. Is you had more than half of the country, 26 different states sent response. What was it like? And Robert's been there to see when these other states come in after the storm to help. How was that? How was that to have people buoy you up in that way?
It's heartwarming. You know, when you're sitting there and you're facing devastation and your community has been tossed and you know, our responders are hurting, our communities are hurting, everyone's hurting, trying to, keep it all together, to be able to have others come in and fill in those gaps and kind of work with us to get us through. It's so encouraging, it's so helpful, but that just shows how strong as a nation we are when times like this happens, that we're able to come together and take care of one another.
And Chief, I thank you for being here and thank you for what you do. And I just have to ask you this question. For days after, there was still active search and rescues going on. You guys were part of that. Did you ever just feel like at some point, we can't keep going because of the heat and just the trauma that was all around you?
Yeah, I mean, that's always one of those things. And, when you're a public servant, sometimes you actually will sacrifice yourself at all cost. And there were so many of us that were just so tired, and we didn't even realize how tired we were, how fatigued we were. And because our goal, our heart, our whole commitment to what we do is to serve our public, and we want to make sure that they're okay. So our folks worked tirelessly, and that was police, fire, public works, all others, city staff, and so many other partnering agencies were just working time and time again. But when those floodgates came in of help, that's when people were able to, kind of step back a little bit and allow others to come in and help us through.
Well done on the service and leadership that you've done here in Fort Myers. We really appreciate coming out today. When we're covering storms at Fox Weather, it's always a part of our story, and we appreciate the work that you do. And we know there's a lot still to be done here, and we're not going to be too distant from the storm recovery as it continues. We appreciate it. Robert, as we move forward here, some of the things that people remember, just like we're hearing from the fire chief, are survival stories, how people got through this, how people got through the storms. And I remember during the storm, we had some images of a family that had to swim out of their home, in order to survive. You were able to go back and see how they're doing.
It's just one of the most remarkable stories and people I've met in covering all of these hurricanes and disasters. Imagine taking your 3-month-old little boy into the storm surge and trying to save his life.
Whee! 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 What are you doing? Do you see the trees?
Baby Charlie, turning 1 year old next month, and a long life ahead of him, all because of his parents' heroic actions as Hurricane Ian ravaged their neighborhood near Fort Myers.
It was really windy at first. First, the roof shingles started flying off our house. Our lanai actually ripped off, flew over the house, and then the water started coming in. It went from about an inch to, almost over our heads in about 20 minutes. We originally had gone up to the attic, but we weren't sure how high the water was going to go. So we eventually took Charlie, put him in a plastic bin that was storing our Christmas decorations, and the cat as well in a separate bin, and we swam out our front door and kind of floated down our road, drifting.
Your instincts kick in, you assess what's around you, and we saw the bin, we knew it would float in water. Obviously not knowing kind of at the time how fast the water was going, but you just kind of do what I've never held on to something as tight as I could. So I honestly don't like thinking about it a whole lot because but
it was a lot.
It's a lot that goes through your mind.
Yeah, good job.
By the time they floated down their neighborhood streets in strong currents and landed on high ground, they knew they had made it out. Listen to Callie's account moments after.
Not sure how long until we can get out of here, but it does look like the water's starting to recede. These steps were underwater, they're not anymore. So I do think it's going out. But rest in peace, house. Definitely gone. Love you guys, love everybody. Thank you for all the prayers. It's been pretty scary, but we're okay. Thanks to the fabulous neighbors. You literally saved our lives.
Then you come back to today and thankfully it turned out the way it did. But
you just never knew in that time. We didn't know where we were floating to. We didn't know where we could have been. I mean, it could have gone completely differently.
8 months later, they have been forced to move twice, now living in Chad's mother's apartment. They are in litigation with insurance as their home that they escaped sits idle in the Florida heat and rains.
It's still very emotional. Every time we do go back to that house, I get very anxious and I don't like thinking about it. So for me, moving forward is just right now, not thinking about it and hoping that it'll be easier once it's settled, when we can never have to look back at it again, just have that closure of being done with this process, because it's just not fun to think about.
They had our prayers, and to see their little boy growing. I mean, you do survive in whatever way necessary for your kids, whether it's in that moment of survival or down the stretch, however long it takes.
Yeah, Amy, first of all, it's emotional for me to even watch that piece, even though I did the interview and put it together.
You have a daughter who's near the age of this baby.
I do. As a matter of fact, we were talking about that. My daughter, Lyra, is literally within days of Charlie's birthday. And frankly, and I have 3 other daughters. Right. In fact, one of my oldest is 15 years old today. And so you realize you do anything for your children, but under that kind of distress of Mother Nature, not knowing, can you imagine, stepping out into the waters because your house is completely inundated and being sucked out and drugged.
The water was so fast.
I just can't fathom how they did it, but they're alive and they're gonna get through it.
but you saw what they faced, and some people did not survive that same scenario. It's an important story. Thank you for sharing it with us. You know, as we move through this new season, here we are, June 1st, the start of what's going to be ahead for us. We're already looking at a disturbance there in the Gulf. We hope you'll be a part of our team here at Fox Weather. Hurricane headquarters for you. We're on top of the storms. We're into the stories that are happening. We have Fox Weather hurricane specialist Brian Norcross. He reflects on a lot of the things that have happened postseason, looks ahead to the new season. One of the things he shares with us right now is, when did we know that the story about storm surge would come to be so prevalent, and how it would be so dangerous?
I'm Brian Norcross with a Hurricane HQ Minute on the question, when did we know the storm surge could be dangerous during Hurricane Ian's approach to Florida? Tragically, almost 150 people died when Hurricane Ian made landfall in Florida in 2022. Many of them from storm surge that plowed over the coast up to 15 feet high. And that raises the question, what water levels were forecast? And when did those forecasts come out? Storm surge is the water rise above the normal high tide level caused by the strong winds of a hurricane pushing the ocean or Gulf water across the beach and over the land. The water can't drain because the wind keeps blowing more water in. The height of the water above the normal high tide level is what we call the depth of the storm surge. The National Hurricane Center issued their first storm surge forecast when they put up a storm surge watch. That was about 66 hours or more than 2.5 days before landfall. The forecast that Sunday evening was 4 to 7 feet above normal high tide. That would sweep cars away and water would come into houses in low-lying areas. On Monday at 5 p.m., the official warning was issued. The forecast was still for up to 7 feet of water above high tide, but the warning added certainty to the forecast. Tuesday at 11 a.m., the forecast increased to 8 to 12 feet of water on the islands. Local officials finally announced some evacuations that afternoon. Then Wednesday, the morning of landfall, which came in the mid-afternoon that day, close to a worst-case scenario developed, up to 12 to 18 feet of water over the coast. It's still a mystery why residents and local officials didn't react more aggressively to these storm surge forecasts. When the National Hurricane Center is forecasting danger, people really do need to believe it. Fox Weather is Hurricane HQ. Be prepared. Turn on critical alerts in your Fox Weather app now.
Weather Command in Florida, live in Fort Myers. It's day one of a new season, but for many, the recovery from last season never stopped. Disaster fatigue, storm anxiety are really an everyday part of life here in Fort Myers. Nevertheless, part of weathering it together means that we've got to face the storms that come our way. And there is a disturbance right now that we're watching in the Atlantic. Hurricane hunters are going to be going into this storm. We're waiting for the latest advisory to come in. This is what we know right now. We have a chance of a development at 50% over the next 2 days. So what that could mean is that we could get our first named system of the season. That would be Arlene. That's the storm for this season. Here are the hurricane hunter planes that are scheduled to go in. Fox Weather's Nicole Valdez is actually in Biloxi. She's going to be tracking all of this and the information that they get from these storms. Now, because it's in the Gulf and we've got a lot of high populations around the Gulf, we want to stay on top of this storm. We think that the threat for the peninsula, for Florida, has been lowered. We don't have as much of a threat there, but we could get some rain. And so you keep an eye out. When you got this much tropical moisture trying to organize so close to the coastline, you've got to stay on top of the storm. We are also waiting right now for the update from Colorado State University. They put out their first forecast in April, Bill Klotzbach and his team, and now they're going to be updating it at 11 a.m. today. And as they do that, it's going to be very interesting to see how El Nino plays in this. Early, when they put the forecast out, El Nino was a thought, and they actually said we have some uncertainty here in the forecast because of El Nino's possibility, but they gave a lower than average prediction, even with that. Now, we know El Nino is coming and it's developing. It could be a strong El Nino. So that gives us a higher degree of confidence here that perhaps we'll see some of that reflected in this new forecast. We'll wait and see. NOAA did offer their forecast up last week, near normal. But they also made a lot of mentions of what could happen because of El Nino. Maybe a lesser storm count, but not discounting the possibility that any storms that do form could be very strong. This is all a part of what we're watching at Fox Weather. Let's bring in Robert Ray right now, because last season and You wait, because this season too, he gets into the teeth of these storms. When Hurricane Ian made landfall, 15, 16, 17 hours, you're in this storm, telling us the story of the wind, the rain, and the monster surge coming in. As you get back here to Fort Myers, it's beautiful. It's a paradise here. What kind of memories does it bring back?
It is, yeah. And you sit here and you realize that 8 months ago, where we were was full of debris upwards to 10, 15 feet in some areas. All of the sand that we're on was pushed onto the roads. The active search and rescues were occurring. And now you hear the sounds of progress on Fort Myers Beach. And you have people who are still reeling, yes, but many people who are trying to move forward with their lives and try to rebuild and give a rebirth of this incredible community here in Fort Myers Beach.
Let's listen to the stories that you found of recovery.
September 28th, 2022. Hurricane Ian came ashore in southwest Florida. Winds over 150 miles per hour. Storm surge rose as high as 15 feet on Fort Myers Beach. Over 150 people lost their lives, 66 of them in Florida alone. Ian is also the costliest hurricane in Florida history, causing over $110 billion in damage.
Well, you wondered if it was ever going to stop. The house I was staying at, my feet were at about 17 feet of elevation, and the water came about a foot from my feet. So we almost had to evacuate. We thought we were going to have to evacuate to the third story. Obviously, we saw houses washing by us. We saw boats going by us. We saw, you name it, it floated by us. And, it was just heartbreaking knowing that some of our friends were staying in houses that weren't as strong as the one that we were in. And unfortunately, we lost some friends.
Many survivors, like Catherine Butler, are still reeling on Fort Myers Beach. Block after block, homes are crumbling or gone from their foundations. 97% of the structures here were destroyed or damaged. Today, some residents are living in trailers while they wait for insurance money. 8 months later.
The insurance, I've paid 3 insurances for 27 years, and only one of the 3 has paid. The one that did pay, I sent to my mortgage company because they told me they would apply it towards my loan. But unfortunately, they're holding it hostage in an escrow account, and since I still have a mortgage balance, they've refused to apply that money towards my mortgage. So I have this hefty monthly mortgage payment on a house I no longer own.
Ranking as the second largest insurance loss in world history, Ian is only second behind Hurricane Katrina in 2005, according to new analysis. For Paul Edwards, whose family built a home on Fort Myers Beach in the 1950s, only to see it washed away by Ian, the future is uncertain.
I still have property here, but it's not really home anymore. That kind of thing. So what is the rebuilding process going on? What does the future look like? I don't know.
There is no telling how long the rebirth will take, but for those staying, the fight is real and raw.
We have good days and bad days, and fortunately now there are more good days, but I'll be honest with you, my cup is so full that just one extra little drop I overreact to.
The stories, the patience. Hurricane Ian took out so many businesses, so many important things to people, their homes, their livelihoods here in Southwest Florida. But you look at this example of some of these businesses and the resiliency. I want you to take a look, you guys, at some of the pictures here. You're going to recognize them, Julia. This is the Salty Crab Bar and Grill, Fort Myers Beach, about a 7-minute walk from where we are right now, just totally decimated. This property demolished, lost 2/3 of the building. Julia Casino, Director of Marketing here at this Salty Bar. First of all, Salty Crab Bar and Grill is a multiple restaurant franchise here in Florida. It's well known. People love to go here with their families. Talk to us about, as you look back at what the storm did and where you are right now.
So, it's
It's an unknown process for everybody, and we're all kind of navigating it as best we can. You know, we always try and find the silver lining in everything, and it just so happened the day before the hurricane hit, we found out about a property in St. Augustine. So when we lost this restaurant here, we were able and lucky enough and fortunate enough to be able to relocate many of our staff that wished to relocate to St. Augustine. So they had an income and they had a place to stay. So as far as businesses are concerned, we've been very fortunate in that. We did lose 2/3 of the restaurant. We were able to watch the live video feed from our cameras until the water hit about 5 feet, and then we lost video. It was just devastating to just sit and wait, and we couldn't get on property for 2 days before we could see the real damage of what had occurred.
I have to ask you, in the aftermath of these disasters, it's all about details, right? In the rebuilding process. What are your biggest challenges on the ground right now for you guys as a business?
So the biggest challenge for us is because we are essentially rebuilding from the ground up. There are new guidelines, obviously. One that the city has put forth has been parking spaces are a requirement for any new build. For us, that is a bit of a challenge because our property had no parking spaces before, and we thrived without parking because we're so close to Times Square. So that has been the real challenge for us, is coming up with parking in a space that we essentially don't have the ability to do.
And that's all about the negotiation with the city.
Right.
And Amy, and as you know, I mean, the city is trying to work through this ad hoc a little bit, I think.
Absolutely, they are.
Yeah.
We appreciate you coming by the Salty Crab Bar and Grill. We look forward to the rebuild. We're going to be a part of this story with you. We're continuing to follow these stories here on Fort Myers Beach. So thanks for welcoming us to the block. Everything in progress as it is, and we'll be seeing you. You haven't seen the last of us at Fox Weather. We want to see these businesses come back. We want to see the tourism return here to Fort Myers Beach. Our temperatures right now at 80 degrees. We're just really hugging the coastline here where the Gulf is in the backdrop. We are also keeping an eye on 91L, which is a tropical system right now, the first day of hurricane season, already heating things up. Our location here is special. It's one that you might know when we start to talk about it, Robert, because a lot of people, if they've been to Fort Myers, they've been right here.
Indeed. And this is an incredible place, and you are the general manager. Thank you for being here. The Beach Bar, and you've hosted us here, and I appreciate it. How's your comeback going at this point?
So we're doing what we can with what we have. So we actually dropped this trailer and the portable site here about January 3rd. So we're proud to say we only lost 97 days of business after losing our entire building.
Oh, Matt Fowler, you know, we're here on the beach. You're seeing a portion of what's set up, and you describe kind of your setup. You've put the tables out, you have umbrellas, you have the stand here that people can come back to, but you were really wiped out. Have people met you with a warm reception? I can only imagine that people are just so happy to see something normal that they can come back to.
Absolutely, and that was our goal with getting the trailer set up as fast as possible, that we wanted to show the community we're not going anywhere. We're here to rebuild with everybody, and we want to give people a sense of normalcy to kind of have a beverage, enjoy the beach, and listen to some live music.
Matt, I know you guys are trying to rebuild. You're going through a permit process, negotiating with the city, with everything else, and it will happen eventually. But your message to people across America who vacation here, and the fact that you are trying to come back.
Come on down. Don't be scared. We need the tourism. It supports this island. Just know in your mind that we're all doing the best we can with what we have, and
it is
we're
a
in
slice
this
of
together.
paradise. I can see why you chose this, Matt. I can see why you chose this to be here, and it is a little bit of a price to pay to face the ocean storms, but you walked away with your life, and there's always a new beginning, and we're going to be here to support you.
And by the way, I take that hat off and put on the Fox Weather.
I thought you were going to make him switch you or
yeah,
something.
I'm making him switch right now. All right, that's it. Fox Weather hats for everybody here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for hosting us at the
guys.
Beach Bar. Weather Command is live here in Florida. We continue with Fort Myers Beach. Eyes to the sky. We've been looking at many locations across Florida. Venice Beach are just one of them. We've got our eye on you. A little wet, a little warm today. We got highs in the 90s, but that'll trigger some of the afternoon storms and gusty winds. Stay tuned because the Fox Forecast Center and your hurricane headquarters tracking 91L. It's lingering in the Gulf of Mexico. Right now, it's got a 50% chance of development within the next 2 days, meaning it could become the first named storm of the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season. We've got much more on Weather Command. Welcome back to Weather Command in Florida, live in Fort Myers. Hurricane Ian left this area badly damaged when it hit last fall. As we look back at some of the imagery, the storm surge was devastating. A Category 4 storm, the direct hit on Fort Myers. We've watched the storm surge over and over again. Some of the footage, though, we start to dissect and we start to see new pieces of information. And some of this footage was taken by Joe Orlandino. He's a longtime resident here of Fort Myers, contractor as well on the island. He and his family rode out Ian's Fury. So you've seen some of the storm. Joe, one of the things I saw here when we were watching a video is of a home floating by, a roof floating by, that we had seen in another piece of footage on another part of the island. Welcome here today. 8 months ago, you were in the teeth of the storm. How do you feel today?
Well, it's odd because we're now at the back end and we have to do a lot of the cleanup and rebuilding. So it's a uncharted territory. We don't have a lot of identity, I think, that as much as we had before. It's been difficult. We're living through it.
Old Florida is what Fort Myers Beach in this area is known for, Sanibel Island. Do you think that you can preserve it as the rebuild occurs?
I think we can try. I think we can do our best. In most cases, I think we're going to have a difficult time to create the original old Florida that we all love, the character of it. The requirements today for building are definitely tougher, and that will reflect in the buildings we build that will definitely probably take out some of that character.
I'm assuming that you'll have competition too, people coming from the outside wanting to take advantage or be a part of the future here. In some ways, you know, Fort Myers Beach will never be the same. But perhaps part of the build back brings those opportunities of new people, new ideas, and it does turn out to be even better than it could have been.
We've got a lot of new people showing up that are buying real estate. There are people that have owned larger parcels throughout the area that are now getting aggressive buying parcels. It does appear that we're going to have a lot of redevelopment. I think it's just a matter of the town helping keep that character and the community putting together a plan to make sure that we keep that character, and I think that's important for this island.
Joe Orlandini, Fort Myers resident contractor. I know you're going to be here for a long time. You got 20 years under your belt. You'll be here for the rebuild, and we're going to be along for the ride with you. Thank you so much for dropping by.
Thank you for having me.
And we look forward to your future here.
Thank you.
We've got a lot of storm stories to talk about. I feel like we could set a sign out and say, come on down, we'd love to hear your story, because the relief efforts have been ongoing, and you start to see people turn a page. You start to see them make a move and create part of their second phase story, their second chapter. Robert, I know when you go into storm zones, sometimes you're either right before or right there showing up when the American Red Cross does. And joining us right now, we've got Executive Director for the Southwest Chapter. Thank you so much for being with us, Jill Palmer.
Thank you.
As you look back at 8 months have passed, what are you guys doing today here in Fort Myers Beach?
The progress is absolutely incredible, the resiliency of this community. So 8 months post-storm, we are still working with our clients that were in shelters through our shelter resident transition program, helping ensure that they're moving forward with their recovery. We're also starting our long-term recovery, working with organizations in the community that are continuing their mission, providing them with grants and funding from the great work the Red Cross did with fundraising.
Jill, I have to say, I was on San Carlos Island several days after Ian hit, and I saw one of your members, a Red Cross person out there, hugging a couple that was standing at the front of their decimated house. In fact, Amy, I was talking to you live right when this happened. And her care Your Red Cross members' care for that couple made all the difference in that moment. And I mean, kudos to you guys on that. And that's the importance of your organization in the aftermath of, one of the worst natural disasters in American history, which is
Absolutely. Alleviating human suffering, that's our mission. That's what we do. We give hugs, we give comfort, we bring hope. When you see that Red Cross pull up on the scene of a disaster, you know that help is on the way. And I'm so glad you shared that story. Those are some of my favorite memories from the days following Ian, driving around, passing out a bottle of water, a simple snack, and giving a hug.
And the guidance that you all give to people as far as, this is where you can go talk to people for insurance or FEMA. You're like a roadmap, essentially, for the survivors.
Absolutely. And then it's all part of our case management that we do with the shelter resident transition, ensuring the community has access to the resources that they need. We work with a lot of partners. It takes a lot of people to respond to a disaster. The American Red Cross is just one of those organizations. We work together as a team. We want to ensure the community has the resources that they need so that they are empowered to move forward with the recovery.
You've always been there, but one of the legacy aspects of the American Red Cross is volunteer work, because people have been helped, and so they want to help others. So I love that story, and we appreciate you being here. Jill Palmer from the American Red Cross, Southwest Florida. You guys always have a lot of work to do here because it can be a stormy area. We appreciate you being with us here. Live Weather Command in Florida. We'll be back here on Fort Myers Beach as they continue to rebuild. We've got another hurricane season actively approaching, underway. Here we are, day one. A lot to talk about. We want to get you ready. More Fox weather from your hurricane headquarters next. It's the first day of hurricane season, just 8 months since Hurricane Ian. Fox Weather revisits the storm's path.
This storm just continues to wreak havoc here.
We take a look at where the rebuild stands and how Florida moves forward in the storm season ahead. Ian made landfall in Cayo Costa as a monster Category 4 storm with winds of 155 miles per hour on September 28th. The direct hit wiped away homes and businesses along the southwest Florida coastline. The devastating impacts continued hundreds of miles inland to the central and northern part of the state, becoming the deadliest storm to strike Florida in more than 80 years. Hurricane Ian proved it only takes one storm. Fox Weather's Robert Ray takes us from landfall to storm recovery. While storms come and go, Fox Weather Hurricane HQ kicks off a new storm season and a renewed commitment to weather it together. Welcome to Weather Command in Florida, live on Fort Myers Beach. I'm Amy Freeze. 2023 hurricane season is upon us, and right on cue, we've got a disturbance to talk about. It's in the Gulf. And by the way, we do have Colorado State University's new forecast for the hurricane season. We've got that in just a moment. Here's the latest details, though. The National Hurricane Center has been waiting for some new information to come in for the hurricane hunters. They're scheduled to go up into this disturbance, but they've identified 91L, giving it a 50% chance for development over the next 2 days. We've got 48 hours here to watch, and really it will be all about the thunderstorm development and how this can organize. Wind speeds are getting up there in the mid-30s, but if this is to organize, it would become the first named storm of the season. Arlene's the first name this year on the list, and we'll be watching this very carefully. It's interesting because we talk about the first named storm. There was actually one storm that happened earlier this season. We're going to talk about that as we release the forecast details, but we have also been monitoring the impact that this might have, the storm in the Gulf, the disturbance in the Gulf on the peninsula of Florida. Perhaps a lower impact. That's kind of good news here for Florida. We do need some rain on the west coast of the state, but the rest of the state has really been inundated. The rainy season has had a very aggressive start. Let's get into that and get the latest information from that. We get the hurricane forecast from CSU, and this is their update. It looks like they have given, they've given a boost right here, 15 named storms. Now, what they did in their notation here, Colorado State University and Phil Klotzbach and his team, is they are now including the January storm. So we had a disturbance in January. We didn't talk about it in January for a variety of reasons, but they did go back and identify that as the first storm season of the season. But if it's not happening they don't give it a name. So because it was a reanalysis storm, doesn't get a name, but it was the first storm. So I think that's why we see that 15. CSU still giving a confidence that we would see a near normal season. That's exactly what NOAA did as well. So an average hurricane season. What we do with that is we've got to say, just because it's right on target with what we typically average out at, doesn't mean you let down your guard. Doesn't mean that it won't be a bad season, because it just takes one. We've got to be talking about that as we go through the start of this hurricane season. Now we get to Fox Weather's Brandy Campbell. She's in Miami. Again, we were talking about this, Brandy, potential crosshairs of yet another big rainmaker. It's a bit of a relief that this one doesn't look like it'll drench the peninsula, but if we could get some rain in parts of the state, that'd be good. Miami certainly doesn't need it, though, at this point.
That's right. We're doing pretty good when it comes to rain. Thankfully, we are dry at this moment. The weather's actually pretty nice out here in Miami, but we are currently under a flood watch going into the weekend here. Now, one thing I do want to point out, 14% of the state is in drought. So like Amy said, some places could use this rain, but places like Miami and Fort Lauderdale, we are in a surplus for rain to date for this year. Now, if you want to take a look at this video, you can see why that is. This is from Fort Lauderdale in April. Early April, they had a storm that actually drenched the area, dropping over 2 feet of rain, flooding several areas here in southeast Florida. Now, Fort Lauderdale, they are in surplus of over 30 inches of rain to date. Here in Miami, we have over 10 inches of rain over our average. So the 2 to 6 inches of rain that's expected, that could cause an issue with flooding here, because many places, the grounds, they're already saturated. So not many places for that water to go. Meanwhile, places like Tampa that are in drought can use the rain, but they won't get the bulk of it from this disturbance. So for now, we are starting to see some of the messaging from the city and state to warn people to go ahead and be prepared for flooding that could happen, not to drive into flooded roads. But we're also seeing the city of Miami, they're hosting a hurricane drill for their emergency operations center to get prepared, and asking the residents to also get ready for this season, because this is just the start. Back to you, Amy.
Fox Weather's Brandy Campbell, we will be on top of this. Great to hear that they're doing some preparations on June 1st, because as we head into the season, a lot of people in Florida, there's a little bit of storm anxiety, as you've heard as well, Brandy. And when you see those preparations underway, it gives you a lot more confidence about what's ahead. Let me bring in Fox Weather's Robert Ray. Our whole team here at Fox Weather is getting ready for the new season. But Robert, here on Fort Myers Beach, it's a little bit of returning to the war zone in a way. You were here during the storm. It's 8 months ago. Does it seem like it's been 8 months?
It seems a little bit longer than that, and it's amazing to see the progress, and yet the amount of work that's being still going on here. And you can actually hear it in the distance right now. I mean, we hear a crane and one of those bobcats moving stuff around, and all of our colleagues at Fox Weather who are on the ground during and in the aftermath. When we come back to positions like this, I think what I'm struck by, what I remember sometimes that in a sense haunts me in a way, are the eyes and the faces of the survivors, and to see that post-traumatic stress that they were going through, and knowing that the road ahead was so long for them and is going to be. And that's what many of them are still going through.
I mean, you're in disaster fatigue, and here we are on day one of yet another storm season. That raises the anxiety level for sure. Some of the things I've noticed here is that they've been able to bring back a lot of the sand, not just for Fort Myers Beach, but you've also had Sanibel, Pine Island. Some of these places have been truckloads of sand coming in to rebuild these beaches.
And that's the key, right? I mean, this is about tourism, and once you get the white sand back, you're going to attract the tourists, and then the restaurants reopen and the hotels, and the economy, starts to move. And that is key, and the essence of Southwest Florida, all the way from Marco Island to Naples to where we're at to Sanibel to Pine Island, all the way up to Sarasota. This is one of the most beautiful stretches of coastline in America, and frankly, some think the world.
I know that you've worked, in a variety of ways with different parts of this community, everything from the residents to business owners, but we've also been able to tap into some resources like the Coast Guard and get a vantage point of the storm to now.
Yep, first responders are the key to the success in the aftermath of any storm, no matter the impact. And the U.S. Coast Guard by air and by sea, the men and women, the bravery. Let's listen.
an incredible storm. I mean, for the Coast Guard, just monumental response by our own teams, by all of our partners. Obviously, right after the storm, a huge amount of search and rescue. Those folks that got caught at the islands, those folks who just could not evacuate from the storm or didn't anticipate it, particularly our senior communities and those that, like I say, were not able to leave. A lot of work to get those folks the medical care and provisions that they needed. And then, so in entirety, we had more than 500 Coast Guard women and men responding for Hurricane Ian. More than 700 folks were saved or assisted by Coast Guard and partner agencies. Our air station out of Clearwater alone in the first 48 to 72 hours lifted more than 100 people to safety. So in total, the Coast Guard did a survey with our state partners immediately following the storm. We identified 7,250 vessels that were displaced by the storm. Fort Myers, I don't think anybody anticipated that we'd have 8 to 12 foot seas running down the streets of Fort Myers Beach, and that's no different for the Coast Guard. Our own units are low-lying, and our station was destroyed. And wind and damage, primarily it's those inundation by the sea that is the most dangerous. Yeah. If you're on the coast of Florida, you need to be prepared for hurricanes. Hurricanes will continue to come, and whether it's a Cat 1 or a tropical storm, there's certain things you can do to make yourself much more prepared for when that storm arrives. That's heed the warnings from your local county. If you're in a flood zone, listen to those, follow them. Prepare ahead of the storms. Don't wait for the first storm to get your supplies, to have your plan ready to go. Do that now. When the storm hits, your Home Depots and your hardware stores will be overrun with folks. So plan ahead.
An incredible storm indeed, as we remember, Ian. America suffered $12.5 billion disasters last year, 18 of them. 3 of those were hurricanes. Now, through 5 full months of 2023, we've already had $7 billion disasters. We're just starting hurricane season. These are expensive disasters for our country. So when we're dealing with storms, you've got to think about the economic impact. And yesterday I spoke with Federal Emergency Management Association Director Deanne Criswell, and she says that FEMA's goal, and we talked about a lot of these storms and their price tags, she says their goal is to try to keep that tab from running up. But in order to do that, they've got to replace infrastructure that can withstand some of the storms for the future. A community like Fort Myers, so devastated by Hurricane Ian, received a lot of FEMA money. When you start to see a community build back like that and some of the dollars at work, what's the biggest hope that can come out of a situation like that?
Now, Hurricane Ian was so devastating to so many communities, but in particular, Fort Myers and Fort Myers Beach just sustained so much damage. But there's so much opportunity now, right, as they are rebuilding and trying to bring back this community and the vitality of the community to make sure that we're building it back in a way that's going to make it more resistant to these storms in the future.
What is your hope as we move forward? Is it that we start to get more resiliency in place, because it just seems so expensive? How can we possibly keep up this price tag? Perhaps the money is better spent ahead of time to create that resiliency.
The money is absolutely better spent ahead of time. Every dollar invested in mitigation saves $8 in recovery, and every dollar invested in adopting modern building code saves even more. I think it's somewhere around $12. These are important investments to make sure that we can reduce the impacts that we're seeing. We're on this year-round cycle, as you mentioned, of severe weather events.
FEMA is a lot about money, giving federal funds, helping people get back on their feet. As you go to some of these communities, whether it's in the disaster mode or in the recovery mode, what do you get on a human level from what FEMA is able to do in these communities?
The neighbors and how these communities come out and help each other. Our neighbors are our true first responders, right? And we want to make sure that we give them all of the information to help themselves prepare, but also to make sure that they have the tools and the knowledge to help their community, to help their neighbors after an event happens, because they're the ones that are going to get in there right away. I heard amazing stories of survival, but then going immediately in to help their neighbors out. Those are the true heroes.
As we start hurricane season, is there anything that's top of mind for you? Is there anything that FEMA is working on in order to be prepared? We know that perhaps the anticipation of a quieter season is in front of us, but it's still not a time to let down our guard.
No, it's not a time to let down our guard. Just because Atlantic hurricane season might be less, we just saw our first storm in the Pacific with Super Typhoon Mawar. And these threats continue to materialize in different ways across the U.S. And so for us, it's one, making sure that our team is ready. But second, and more importantly, is again, making sure people understand what their risk is. I think it's so important that we help get that message out into what your risk is. People live in different areas than they did last year. They're facing risks that they've never experienced. They need to know what to do. So if they're told to evacuate, they know what that means and where they're going to go.
We will be paying attention to FEMA and their responses all of this hurricane season. And, you know, the work they do in one season certainly carries over. Hurricane Ian was the deadliest storm in Florida in 80 years. That is a priceless statistic that is hard to consider. Coming up, this is an important story that we're telling here on Fox Weather, a special investigation about the evacuation of Lee County, Florida, Fort Myers Beach, where we are right now. We look back at how that transition happened and ways we could do it better in the future. Plus, the Fox Weather Camera Network has its eyes on Florida this hurricane headquarters season. You've got Tampa here. Temperatures in the 80s, folks. Naples is pushing at mid-80s for you. Some sunshine here, but watch out for the afternoon clouds and thunderstorms so familiar as we roll into June. Miami, hello to you from Weather Command. Welcome back. Weather Command live in Florida. Fort Myers Beach is where we're at. What a day. Little slice of paradise here. You can see why people choose to live in this gorgeous coastal community. You want the front row seat to the Gulf, but there's a price to pay. You've got to be ready for these storms. And when Hurricane Ian came inland, right where we are was underwater. The surge went up 15 feet. A tall wall of water that pushed inland. You know, waves and wind, a part of Hurricane Ian, brought this rapid, powerful invasion, and it wiped out portions of this community. We had a camera positioned here in Oceanside looking at this. It captured the water coming in, and you could just see how quickly the streets filled up. This water kept coming until it was 15 feet. So you think about your toes in the sand at Fort Myers Beach, the water came up well above anyone's head here, and that's where the damage and destruction went down. This is often the most underrated part of any tropical system or hurricane. Certainly it's the most deadly portion of these storms. And when we look back, you want to evacuate, you want to get away from these storms. And that's one part of the preparation you should be making for this hurricane season. You need to figure out what your evacuation zone is. What would you do if there was a storm coming in? Right now, Fox 4, we go to Southwest Florida and our sister station here. They spent 7 months digging into Hurricane Ian's evacuation process. They reviewed the forecast. You went back to the National Hurricane Center. You went to the local National Weather Service. You looked at the public statements, the Lee County public conferences, the teleconferences that they put out there. I'm so happy you're with us. Fox 4, Nadine Inez is here. Investigative team put together this. Why did you guys decide to go back and look what happened? I mean, we did lose more than 150 people tragically in this storm. 40 of those drowned trying to evade the water.
Yeah, and thank you for having us here, Amy. This was an important piece for us to investigate and look into. You're absolutely right. It all started with the news conferences. We had the storm surge watches in place Sunday night. So Monday, everyone's tuning in, and we hear our Lee County leaders say, if you're nervous, you can leave on the barrier islands. And it really just felt the urgency wasn't there. People were even questioning it in the news conferences live. And then as we know, those evacuations started coming the next morning, and the tone really shifted that Tuesday morning, saying we are in great peril. But when that tone shifted, by the time those evacuations were in place, as we know, it was less than 24 hours later.
Lee County had already been in the cone for a couple of days. Right. You're going to share part of your investigation. I know it's a long investigation. Folks can check it out on Fox 4, but what part are you sharing with us?
Yeah, that's right. It's a 17-minute piece. We've brought it down to about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. You're going to hear what was hard for us to really get, the voice of the survivors who have really been taking the brunt of saying, hey, well, you knew it was coming, you should have left, you're an adult, you make that decision.
It's hard.
Some of the survivors, though, felt that in comparison to past storms like Irma, the urgency wasn't there. They feel like this is a shared responsibility, that if they had buses here and people knocking on doors, they might have been able to leave.
Made a very bad decision to stay.
September 28th, 8:12 a.m.
Mitch Pacina began documenting his day as Hurricane Ian flirted with Southwest Florida's coast, already anxious.
Okay, surge is coming in. All right, let's hope for the best.
Mitch's last video posted at 12:23 p.m.
This ain't letting up yet. If it gets a little higher, may have to go on the roof.
1 hour later, his last post, reading, "Okay, we're terrified."
Do you feel like if that urgency was there, more people would be alive?
Yes. I don't think Mitch and Mary would have stayed if they had thought it was going to get up to there. It was almost like
wrong decision.
Kind of just left it up to us.
It's okay to go now.
Should we have taken it more seriously? Of course, but they should have relayed it to us a lot sooner and a lot in more desperation. Like, hey guys, leave. During Irma, they had buses coming and getting people too. And there was none of that. This time, it was really like the day before. They're like, get out now. Get out now. This is serious. And we're like, we don't have a car.
In hindsight, could you have done it a day earlier? Of course. We did that up in Tampa.
You could just see how slow, a car is going at this time.
This evacuation's timing contradicting the county's own emergency plan that cites a 2010 study saying Lee County needs more than 20 hours to safely evacuate Zone A, B, and C. And by the time the 32-hour mark was reached between when the county issued the first evacuation order,
mandatory evacuation order,
to when Ian's eye made landfall, it was 3 p.m. Wednesday. Half of the hurricane was already on shore.
We desperately wish that there had been no fatalities. And we will, of course, tweak our messaging. Be Zone A, I'm comfortable with the decisions that were made and the timing.
Despite these decisions did not follow the county's own plan.
And it seems like it's a pretty simple chart. It says once we get the storm surge at 40%, 4 feet or higher, we call Zone A. By Sunday night at 11, we had more than 40%. So what's the point of having a plan if it's laid out in black and white, but then we don't adhere to it?
All of those studies that you see and charts that you see calling for evacuation times, that's a place to start. That's not the final decision point.
We're back here. Fox 4 is our sister station. Welcome on board, morning meteorologist Trent Eric. I'm really excited to see you in person because as part of the Fox weather teams across the board, we work together, and I'm diving right in. And Dean, incredible investigation. A lot of your stuff involved meteorology, and so I'm sure there was some talking, communication about this. But let's dive right into what's happening in the Gulf. I mean, your morning's probably been spent looking at this, Trent.
Yeah, when things pop up this time of year, a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention.
Right.
But boy, after Ian, 246 days ago, we were 10 to 15 feet underwater right here. And now anytime we get a little hatched area out there, everybody's anxiety just shoots up. So I think that's something we're going to be battling this year, because unlike the complacency we saw a little bit last year with people who may have gone through Charlie or Irma and been okay, this year something pops up and it's going to get everybody.
Maybe overly sensitive at this point.
Well, that's exactly right. So Lee County did say that they are doing an after-action Ian report, so there were a little bit of concessions there. Also, they said because our community is so vulnerable, they will be screaming it from the mountaintops, is what one commissioner had told me, because of the fact that we won't be able to really withstand anything strong out. I mean, I'm sure when you flew in, you saw the blue tarps still here and people living in trailers.
Yeah, it is hard. I mean, there's so much progress. Probably, comparatively, people feel like they've come a long way. But someone coming in here with fresh eyes and say, wow, I still see debris piles. I still see, the rebuild that's going to happen. Oh my gosh, there's a roof that was blown off. You really see the pieces of the storm evidence behind. As we go throughout this hurricane season, you guys, invitation open here. Fox 4, Fort Myers, we want to be a part of the story with you. Fox Weather, we're coast to coast. But it's important when weather gets in somebody's backyard, how we communicate that with them and how we impact that. So invitation open. Thanks for being here, Fort Myers Beach. Tell the folks back at the station we said hey, and know that we're on board with you as you go throughout these recoveries. We'd love to tell your stories as well. It's all part of the Fox Weather brand. Still to come, we are pushing forward with the National Hurricane Center and some of their forecasts. We've got some changes on how the National Hurricane Center will actually go forth. And it's exciting because we were able to talk with the warning coordinator, Dan Brown of the National Hurricane Center. They're using a new tool this season. It is a 7-day outlook. That's right, 7 days, a week in advance, to look at what potentially a storm might do on the coastlines.
new 7-day outlooks. This is going to be something that we haven't done before. Why go out that far? Is there skill in that? The reason I ask is because a lot of people say, well, I checked the weather on Monday for the weekend, and maybe that was not in the outlook.
Yeah, we've been doing the 7-day outlooks in-house now for a few hurricane seasons, so there is skill in those forecasts. And because of that, we're going to go ahead and issue those to the public starting this hurricane season. It's going to provide people with a little more heads up on when systems could form. And I think it's going to help all of us in the weather community to be able to message these events. People see these events in the models 6, 7, 8, 10 days out, but now it'll give the Hurricane Center a chance to start putting those on our products so that we can all message it in a consistent fashion.
Do you worry that people won't check back?
I hope people for the outlook, really it's a product people should be looking at every day during the hurricane season. Again, it provides what could form, what's going on in the tropics, and it's a really good product to go and look at every morning. We issue those around 8 o'clock every morning during hurricane season, so come to our website, come to your local media, and find out what's going on.
At Fox Weather, we're definitely glued to those advisories and updates. You know, hurricane complacency is a big thing that, especially in Florida, they have to combat. When we come back to a storm like Hurricane Ian, before that storm hit, people had judged previous storms. You've even talked about your own family with Wilma and their ability to adjust to what the storm did. How do you overcome some of that message when people have a storm of reference?
Yeah, you know, that's one thing we really have to avoid. When you look at, especially in the Southwest Florida coast, we had Charlie back in 2004, then we had Irma in 2017, and neither of those storms really produced a significant storm surge in the populated areas. Irma went south, Charlie was very small, so we have to know that each storm is different. And last year with Ian, it was a very large Category 4 hurricane, produced a devastating storm surge. So again, we got to take each storm seriously. Don't let that past experience dictate what you're going to do to prepare for the next one.
Really enjoyed that conversation with him. The 7-day outlook should be a great new tool. It starts the conversation, and it's important, like you said, remember every storm's different. Just because you lived through one and the expectations weren't what you thought it would be doesn't mean that the next one will perform the same. Really important advice there coming from the National Hurricane Center Warning Coordinator Dan Brown. Fox Weather's Robert Ray is always looking at this. I mean, let's talk about this new tool, 7-day outlook. It's been a conversation that we've had amongst the Fox Weather meteorologists back in New York City at headquarters. On one point, I thought to myself, 7 days. Oh, that makes me nervous because people look at it on Monday. Oh, I saw it for the weekend. I'm good to go at the coast. Yeah. But things can really change. So that's one nerve ending that I had as my response. But it's also a conversation.
I think it's a good thing because it stops complacency in the general public as well. And it gets everyone thinking and talking about how they're going to either A, evacuate, B, hunker down based upon the trajectory of where the storm is, and C, figure out how they're going to move on if indeed they know a catastrophe is headed their way.
I sensed a little indication from the National Hurricane Center too that this could be a tone setter, if you will. I know you go back with the Fox Weather Beast after the storm's cleared. You get in here, you're looking at the storm recovery zones and things like this. But way ahead of the storms, sometimes meteorologists try to get a jump on what's going to happen. Maybe this Hurricane Center 7-day outlook sets a tone for what we're looking at, what could potentially may or may not happen.
Agree. I think it will save lives, and I think really that's the underlying meaning and message of this new system they have set up. And I can tell you, I mean, think about Ian's trajectory. How confusing was it? The track kept changing. There was rapid intensification. It was just a remarkable setup. And finally, we figured out that it was going to come in just northwest of us here in Fort Myers Beach. And to think, I mean, I remember, just immediately in the aftermath, a couple days after, with Ben West, actually, who's behind the camera over here and running the Fox Weather Beast, and us coming on to here, Fort Myers Beach, with the piles of debris that could fill up 2 Empire State Buildings.
It's wild.
Remarkable.
It's wild. They've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go. And Fort Myers Beach will never truly be the same, but they're making a lot of strides and a lot of efforts. Here, Weather Command stays with you live in Florida through the rest of the noon hour on the East Coast. We're also sharing some information. There was a study that was released recently about Lee County. We just talked about the evacuation here. Now, as population growth is happening across Florida, evacuation zones are important. In fact, getting to know your zone is so critical. If we were to have a Category 5 storm this season in Lee County, evacuation would take about 47 hours, almost 2 days. But with the projected population levels in 2045, just about 20 years from now, evacuation could take 88 hours. That's more than 3.5 days. So as populations change and as you move from spot to spot, your evacuation zone will be different. Make a plan. Fox Weather is here for you to help you get ready for this hurricane season. We're your headquarters. We'll be right back. Weather Command in Florida. We are live on Fort Myers Beach. It's day one of a new season. And for many, the recovery from last season really never stopped. You have disaster fatigue in some of these hard-hit areas. Now, where Hurricane Ian came in with a direct hit here in Southwest Florida along the coastline, it's been really tough, a tough 8 months. Now, we weather it together, and part of that is you got to face the storms ahead. We got to get you ready for the hurricane season. We've got a disturbance already in the Atlantic. We've been keeping a close eye on this. The Fox Forecast Center has been watching this, and this disturbance right now has about a 50% chance of developing over the next 2 days. Now, that means it could become our first named storm of the season. We had the January reanalysis storm. That's maybe storm number 1, but this will be the first one with a name. Hurricane hunters are going to go into this storm this afternoon to capture data. We'll get new information then, but it's out there in the Gulf. Early on, we thought it might impact the peninsula of Florida. We thought we might be in the zone here. Now, we could use a little rain on the west coast, but it looks like here we get a little more than showers, and of the afternoon variety, we get them this time of year. So on Fort Myers Beach, we go back to some of the hardship and loss and really face the storm surge story. Let's bring in right now Fort Myers Beach Mayor, who really, we get the introduction from Robert Ray here on this. So good to have you here. Dan Allers, we feel like we've gotten to know you, actually, of the stories that you've been telling about Fort Myers Beach.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, I've certainly done a few of these over the last few months, but you know, it's important to get the information out to people. You can't get complacent. I think I heard you say that earlier, that you can't get complacent. Every storm is different, and how they react or how you react to it should not be different. You should react to every storm the same.
Yeah, Mayor, thanks for being on. I appreciate it. You know, Amy and I really appreciate your insight on this. Many people may not know this, Mayor, but you hunkered down when the surge came in here on the island. You're okay, but you lost friends and family. And the 8 months later period, it's still, I have to think, traumatic and shocking.
Yeah, you know, it was, you know, we were able to have a little bit of Facebook. I know you covered Mitch earlier. You know, following along with his story was very difficult. Getting calls from people that they knew I was on the island, they knew roughly where I was at, you know, worried about how we were. But I was getting messages from people that were 2 doors down from us that they were having to go into their attic, or their family was saying that they had to go into their attic, and you know, there's nothing you could do to help them. You couldn't get outside to help anybody, and that was the hardest part.
You look back at some of those stories, and you know, I feel fresh. I feel it's fresh, even you telling it now, and we're 8 months past this. What are some of the look forward moments for you? How's the rebuild going? Are you hopeful that Fort Myers Beach can come back to the glory it was before the storm?
Well, I'm beyond hopeful. I mean, just 8 months now after the storm, yeah, we're entering into the first day of another hurricane season. But to see the progress that our community has stepped up, you know, we've had a lot of help from the county. Our sister island just to the north of us, Sanibel, has been very great in working with us. You know, the state level representation has been great, so I can't complain. I mean, we obviously would be like a little further along, but we'll take what we've got so far.
Mayor, quickly on this, this is a smorgasbord of controlled chaos. Building permits, debris removal, insurance, mortgages, the list goes on and on and on. You guys are still going through a lot of the just, you know, tiny pieces that it takes to come back. How long until all that you think is resolved?
Well, it's hard to really put a timetable on it. I mean, we are a fully functional island now. We have people, as you can see behind us, that are enjoying the beach. People are going out to the restaurants and having a good time. You know, it's hard to say exactly where we'll be, whether it's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. That'll depend a lot on obviously permitting. Getting people that want to get back in their houses is our #1 priority. We're going to do the best we can to get them in as fast as we can. There's a lot of things outside of our control, obviously, workers, product, stuff like that. So as fast as we can get it done and safely get it done, we will get it done.
Mayor of Fort Myers Beach, you've got a tough job. Thank you so much for being with us, Dan. I really appreciate you coming by and sharing some insight here. Fox Weather feels like we're part of the story. We hope that we can tell the story. You know, we feel invested in your success in the weeks, months, and years ahead. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
You got it.
Thanks, Mayor.
We go from the beach to the city. We're going to get into the city streets. You go about 20 miles inland and you have the city of Fort Myers. And several people on the city government board have been by. We've talked to them. We've told them stories. Liz Bellow-Matthews joining us right now. Liz, I'm really curious on what you guys learned, lessons you took away, and how you will put those into practice for this hurricane season, the new season right now.
Yes, so there was a lot of lessons learned. I think, so this municipality had never been through something of this magnitude. So I think that our standard operating procedures really needed to be looked at. One of the things that we looked at was our emergency processes and emergency communications processes. So moving forward, we're gonna have at least 12 emergency communication bureaus that are spread out throughout the city.
Wow.
To ensure that people can find out what's happening, what's open, where they can get help, who is ready and available to provide the things that they need. That's something that we noticed that we needed more of.
Mm-hmm. Is the governor and his office playing a role in the way you guys are instrumenting new policies here?
I believe so. I mean, I think as a municipality, we feel very supported, you know, not only by the governor, but, you know, by just the state in general, the federal partners. Everyone has stepped in to provide us what we need. There has been a lot of yeses and, you know, I can say that really no nos at this point.
What you're doing is really critical and important. I'll tell you why. There are cities and towns, coastal towns, you know, that are watching exactly what you're doing because they saw the impact here and they don't want it to happen to them. So they're looking to say, what are they doing? Because we need to apply that. It's an interesting position that you're in because so many people are wanting to take from the lessons that you had and apply them to hopefully save lives. Before we leave you here, how do you feel in general when you come to the beach? Because you're in the city, you know, that's where the river flooding happened. Robert was there for that flooding during the actual storm. But when you come out to the beach, are your spirits lifted to see some of the change?
Well, you know, we see the Fort Myers Beach as an extension of the city. You know, this is one huge municipality when you think about it. You know, all of Lee County is essentially, you know, encompassing sister cities and sister municipalities. So for us to see some of the recovery that has happened here, it's very encouraging. We were very concerned and we deployed as many team members as we could to this area to also assist. So we look forward to getting back on our feet. We know it's going to take years, but we're resilient and we're going to make sure that we come up on top.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and welcoming us to the beautiful sunny slice of paradise you guys have here. We appreciate it. This is coming in just now to Fox Weather. We've got new information about the storm that is out in the Gulf. And what we're doing right now is finding out about the hurricane hunters, the men and women that are directly involved in going into these storms, the early season, the late season storms, the major hurricanes, and they get valuable weather information to share and start the forecast. So they're on their way. The hunters will be inside an afternoon flight to go into this storm that's brewing in the Gulf. Fox Weather's Nicole Valdez, boots on the ground, live in Biloxi, Mississippi. Thanks for joining up with our coverage here. Weather Command is in Florida. We're live in Fort Myers. What are you finding out, Nicole?
Well, Amy, we're just outside Keesler Air Force Base where the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron is actually gearing up to take off here in just the next few hours to really look into and fly directly into that disturbance over the Gulf of Mexico right now, Invest 91L. And this crew really is tasked with finding out a lot more about that disturbance, just maybe more about its strength, its possibility of development there. Now, this is a squadron that really does these flights on a routine basis. So the hurricane hunters here, part of the Air Force Reserve, are tasked and well trained to fly directly into these storms to get all the information they can about exactly what's brewing right now over the Gulf of Mexico. So we're just outside the Air Force Base. As you'll notice, we've got the crew gearing up just behind the gate here, getting ready for that takeoff here. And they'll be in that storm flying around for several hours this afternoon, trying to get as much information as they can to then report it back to the National Hurricane Center in in Miami, Florida. That will give all the meteorologists, including ours here at Fox Weather, a lot more really hardcore information to go with as we expect. I know you guys have talked about the possibility of development here over the next 2 days. So really, the data we receive from today's flight and potentially another scheduled for tomorrow is going to be key to learning much more about that disturbance that is still brewing over that area, Amy. So what we're doing right now is we're just outside the gates. We're getting ready here. We've got Air Force Reserve team members behind the camera here ready to escort us onto the area to get a closer look at that aircraft that is specifically designed to gather all of that data. We're going to do that here in just a few moments. So hopefully here we'll get you a much closer look at that aircraft and a closer look at the crew ready to take off here from Biloxi, Mississippi. Amy.
Gulf coastal communities are on the edge of their seat. Safe flight to them. Nicole Valdez live in Biloxi. Still ahead, Weather Command in Florida continues on Fort Myers Beach. Eyes to the sky all across Florida as we kick off hurricane season. It is June 1st. It marks the calendar start, but we're always watching. In fact, Venice warm and wet today. Temperatures in the 90s, gusty winds, drenching rain on top. Sounds like a typical Florida afternoon. Also, our eyes right here on this storm that has a 50% chance of development. It looks like a little weakening here. Maybe during the day it weakens a bit because what we saw overnight was a strengthening of thunderstorms, but we'll be fixated on this storm and the storm season ahead on Weather Command. Fox Weather and Fox News are dedicated to sticking with communities that are affected by storms today and the entire hurricane season. We're sharing these stories of survival, recovery, of rebuilding. We welcome right now Fox News multimedia reporter Caroline Elliott. You've been on the ground here in Southwest Florida for a couple of months. Right after Ian, you were here. You've been telling these stories. So much impact when you look at this community. What's it been like going back and telling survivor stories?
Well, really, Amy, we've been wanting to keep in touch with those survivors. Really, these stories don't leave you, even after coverage ends. And so really, we first had met Mike Yost maybe 2 or 3 days after the storm. And at that time, they weren't even allowing a lot of people on the island because they were still just so focused on the search and recovery efforts. Now, since then, the island has come a long way, but recovery is still far from over.
Let's listen to a story.
The small town of Fort Myers Beach is getting ready for another hurricane season.
You kind of lost time in the middle, so it's hard to say how long.
But for some locals on the island, it feels like the last hurricane season never ended.
It's a hurricane every day you come here. You look around and you go, wow, hurricane hit here.
On September 28th, 2022, Mike Yost lost nearly everything. His house, his business, and his 2 best friends that didn't survive the storm surge.
We still have our lives, but 2 of my best friends on the beach died.
As the new hurricane season begins, we met him in the same place it started, where the trauma has settled in for many locals.
We had a decent storm a few weeks ago, and the walls were shaking a little, and it was getting pretty bad, and you got that sort of, I guess they call it PTSD sort of thing, where you're like, oh my God, here it comes again.
For some, recovery has been slow.
My personal rebuild has not happened yet. So it's, I'm trying to do different things. Like I know a lot of us that were business owners had to go out and get real jobs, and actually work for somebody else and that kind of stuff. And we're trying to do whatever we can to get by.
As cleanup continues, locals are starting out this hurricane season with a harsh reality check.
No, I won't stay for a tropical storm in a trailer anymore because I've seen what can happen.
It's so tough, but this is an important message.
Absolutely, and we also want to just thank you so much, Mike, for joining us again to share this story. Earlier in the hour, we talked a little bit about the messaging, right, the evacuation process, but one thing that really stuck out to me with your story is you shared with me, some of the last moments from Mitch. You were talking about, his Facebook status. That last status said, okay, we're terrified. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we all were. I mean, the water was coming up. It was at least 12 feet at that point, and it went higher than that. And I lost communication with Mitch and my other friend Damon, and that's when people got really terrified. Like Mitch said, you know, buildings were shaking, and I watched several of them wash away in front of and in back of my house. All of the Red Coconut Trailer Park I watched wash away.
You talked about the reasons that you decided to stay. Like many people who live in coastal communities, you had your storm of reference, you had your bias storm. This is something that a lot of people have. What storm were you referring to that made you say, I can make it through this?
Well, I haven't been here that long, really, compared to a lot of people. I wasn't here for Charlie, and I knew that was an intense storm, especially north of here, but it destroyed a lot of buildings here. But for Irma, you know, a week in advance, I'm like, we better get out of here. And at that time, we had a small child in the house, and I'm like, we need to get out of here. And we kind of waited till 2 days before the hurricane, and finally, everybody had left by this time, and it just seemed like there was way more urgency during Irma than there was during Ian, totally. And I felt like we left at the last minute, even though we were 2 days ahead of the storm. And
what would you tell people now if they have a storm this season they're up against?
Well, leave.
Yeah, leave.
You know, don't risk it. These are life-threatening storms. It's not something to mess with. Like I said, we left. And granted, a tornado hit the house and threw the roof off, but most people, there was no storm surge. Yeah. They were calling for 8 feet then, but it hit at low tide. Mm-hmm. Ian hit at one of these crazy high tide times. It was like one of the perfect timing of the storm surge and the high tide and everything. It was like a tsunami.
Really appreciate you bringing these words to the table on the first day of hurricane season. Caroline Elliott, terrific job as always. Fox News multimedia journalist. Thanks for telling his story and all the good work that you do. We love having you a part of Fox Weather. Thank you to both of you. As we continue here live on Fort Myers Beach, these stories we hope will be something that you take away for the season, for yourself, for your family, and that you'll continue to be a part of the forecast here as we follow the science and the weather ahead of us. You know, we've got a team of meteorologists back at Fox Weather headquarters in New York City, but we do come out to the storm zones. We do come out to see what's happening. We have our team, our Fox Storm Trackers, Mark Sedeth representing today, hurricanetrack.com. Your footage is invaluable to the work that we're doing. Robert, some of the closing thoughts that you have. We're kicking off a new season here today by the calendar terms. We're always watching, though. Yeah. Well, my main takeaway from spending the past several days here in Southwest Florida is the fact that this area is recovering. There is progress, but there is just a tremendous amount of things that have got to happen soon, from insurance to building codes to permits. And I know that a lot of the people, the residents here, are frustrated with that, and they need elected officials, and they need, and frankly, the governor to get more involved. That's what I keep hearing. Mark, you've witnessed some of this too as you've been here the last couple of days. You've also been in different storm zones over time. What are your thoughts about them following the forecast this season? Because they've got to be in touch, even with this disaster anxiety that you get. You got to be in touch. The NHC is going to be doing the 7-day outlooks. How does that play into all of this?
Well, a lot of it's the numbers. These forecasts that are coming out. Colorado State issued their update today. Numbers help us to sort of wrap our brain around how big the season can be, but they don't really tell us about the impacts. What kind of storm surge could I get? And you know, weather is one place where I want people to be selfish. I want you to say, how can this affect me? And then let it grow from there. Me, my family, my businesses, my community. That's what we can do. So the numbers tell us again, these numbers 15, 7, and 3, we could have a pretty active season. But what about the impacts? We don't know yet.
When you say that, I said, well, it only takes one to affect me. It only takes one storm.
And that's fine. That's what I want people to think of. How will this affect me, my property, my community? And we don't know that yet. So that's what we're here for. That's what you tune into Fox Weather for to find out.
Yeah, we're going to be here through it all. And, you know, the hope is that El Nino will tamper down. It will lessen the number of storms that we're having to track. But we remain vigilant because of the sea surface temperatures. We know that there's warmth out there. And this is part of the way that the Earth operates. It is the transfer of energy. Hurricanes must happen in order to keep the balance of energy across the planet. So a necessary evil, but we hope we can keep it away from the coastlines. Mother Nature is violent. All we can do is know what we've learned from the past and go forward, and also not underestimate the impact of what these categories can be, because it's not about how many, not about the category, it's about the impact of the storm.
And
Thanks.
please remember, hope is not a planning tool.
Hope is not a planning tool. That's very, very true. You got to take action.
Sure.
Thanks, team, for being a part of it.
Thank you
We've
all.
been here. We appreciate the opportunity to tell this story together to you. We know Florida is no stranger to hurricane season, but complacency is something we want to avoid. It can be contagious at times. And for those who have actually gone through these storms and maybe met hurricanes without consequence, it's a new season. Native Floridians, people who've moved here, everybody, look at your list, check it twice. For Fox Weather's Robert Ray, the entire team, Mark Sudduth, everybody who's been with us today, all our teammates back in New York City. This is Weather Command in Florida, live from Fort Myers. Have a great day.
We're actually, we're working during Irma. Everything shut down for a while. It was real bad for a while. No connection, no power, no lighting. We live in Sarasota, but we came up here for vacation.
We, of course, block our windows, put shutters up, board them, sandbags, everything, prepare.
Stock up.
Of course, everything
Some
goes
people
out
do
in
a
the
little
stores.
extra,
It's terrible. Everything
there's
goes
not
out in the
nothing left.
stores. That's when everything, it's hard to get gas.
Can't
crazy.
water.
Of course, always. We always have to watch the weather. We live in Florida, so hurricanes here are hurricane seasons all the time. You never know. We just had a really bad weather last night, so.
I guess they're goodbye again. You know, they're going to give us 2 minutes here, Robert. We got 2 minutes to still lead up to America's Weather Center back in New York City. We've been putting together a plan all season. Before you get out in another storm, will you talk a little bit about the preparation you put in? Because some people think, wow, I'm going to get out there. I'm going to be a hurricane reporter in the moment. Maybe I'm going to get out close to the waves.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it's mental because you know that you have to embrace hard.
Right.
To tell you could be upwards to a week or more, and you're going to continue to cycle back into the zone depending on the severity.
Right.
It is mental. It is physical too. And you've got to have all your ducks in order, everything as far as equipment and vehicles. But most of it is right up here, and you got to keep it in the head and know that ain't one thing going to be easy, and you just got to go out and punch and make sure that that's the game plan.
This live, aerial drone footage here of Fort Myers Beach, you're seeing the sand, you're seeing the familiar things you want to see in summer. But part of the risk of living in any coastal community is that trade-off of this slice of paradise. I'm Amy Freeze for Robert Ray, for the entire Fox Weather team. Thank you for being with us. Weather Command in Florida, live from Fort Myers Beach. Be safe this hurricane season. We are your hurricane headquarters.
I'm Brian Norcross with a Hurricane HQ Minute on why Southwest Florida and the Fort Myers area are so especially vulnerable to storm surge. In fact, the entire Gulf Coast is extremely prone to storm surge because of what's just under the water, just offshore. We all saw what happened to the islands just offshore of Fort Myers when Hurricane Ian made landfall. The strong winds pushed the water up to 15 feet above the normal high tide over Fort Myers Beach. Everywhere along the hurricane coast is susceptible to storm surge, but Southwest Florida and the Gulf Coast are especially vulnerable. The view from Google Earth tells the story why. Offshore of the west coast of Florida is a large area of relatively shallow water called the West Florida Shelf. The water there is about 300 feet deep, but at the edge of the shelf, suddenly the Gulf is nearly 10,000 feet deep. So when a hurricane pushes water up over the shelf, it has nowhere to spread except over the land. The bigger and shallower the shelf, the higher the surge. So it's that big shelf around the Gulf Coast that makes it more vulnerable than just about the entire east coast of the U.S. Stay with Hurricane HQ this hurricane season. Be prepared. Download the Fox Weather app now.